Hello, my fellow Westorians. Welcome to another ibisode. Actually, this is the first ever ibisode, but it is another episode. And yes, for such a large but somewhat obscure topic, we've got an excellent guest here today. Someone who loves to focus on topics like this, obscure stuff, the stuff outside the general focus, which is sometimes some of the best stuff. And welcome, Tim, Grey Waste Tim, to History of Westeros podcast. We're happy to have you.
Oh, thank you for having me. Hello, I'm Grey Waste Tim. I run my own YouTube channel, Grey Waste Tim, on YouTube, and you can find me on Twitter at The Grey Waste. My focus has mainly been on Lovecraftian influence on A Song of Ice and Fire, and my specialty is taking a topic that has maybe 2 sentences written about it and making a 2-hour stream out of it.
Right on. Well, we like to do that too, so we're going to collaborate and hopefully something fun comes out of it. I do expect that it will.
So this stream is bound to be about 18 hours.
We take ours, multiply it to 2 hours. Then he does the same and it multiplies. Yeah, just geometric expansion of 2 sentences. So, Sean, that looks like whale oil that you're drinking. Is it indeed whale oil, or is it something else today?
This is just murky green water from the pool of some laboratory. I don't know.
The pool of some laboratory. I didn't know laboratories had pools. Who's got a pool at their lab? These are some fancy labs.
H.P. Lovecraft does.
Yes. The man who died in poverty had without ever having much success, had a pool in his laboratory. Yes, that sounds about right. If he did have a laboratory. Oh, look at that. Tim's drink is the exact same color as yours.
I got some matcha green tea with honey.
Nice.
And I use the skull-shaped glass, and this is the longest spoon I can find, going low, long spoon on it. I need one that's pearl encrusted, though,
yes,
so we can do the,
you do.
do the real Scarlet Emperor stuff.
I do have a new beverage mixed in here. There's caffeinated sparkling ice now. So this is the Green Machine Naked Drink with the Baja Blast Mountain Dew with caffeinated blueberry sparkling ice, and it's good.
Nice. I mean, I don't believe you, but nice. Shout out to our friend Nina. Her notes are always of great help to us. Latest blog post over on Good Queen Alley with 1l.tumblr.com is a question on how the Tyrells could be just so gung-ho about marrying their daughter to 2 people they absolutely know came from an incestuous relationship. Whether they say that out loud is a different thing. But they do know. So that's a good point to consider. We encourage you all to join the discussion. If you're here live watching on YouTube, that's awesome. We appreciate you being here. Have fun with all the other chatters and send a question or 2 if you feel like it. And if you check us out ahead of time, you can always send questions to us to consider before the episode on Facebook or Discord or through Patreon, or just send us an email at westeroshistory@gmail.com. We have a new logo that we've launched today. It's not on the podcast yet. It's on our Twitter. It's on, where else is it?
Where is it?
Yeah.
We have a few variants that we've done. We do have them on YouTube, SoundCloud, Facebook, Twitter. We have a special rainbow version, a variant, just to catch the eye a little more. Trying out a few different things. Yeah, it really pops, and Groban likes his ladies to pop, and his avatars to pop, apparently. But yeah, so I'm rolling that out a few places. That's by Fox and Brambles, who y'all might recognize the name of because she's done some great different sigil designs on Etsy and on Redbubble, so I recommend checking that out. And most excitingly, on our Threadless store on historyofwesteros.threadless.com, or if you just go to historyofwesteros.com and click on shirts, we added variant designs for this logo in different colors. So you could have a dragon egg shirt that's got a purple egg or a blue egg or the Rhaegal egg on a sticker or a shirt or whatever. So go check that out.
Pick your favorite egg color.
Yeah.
This is the new logo that has like the banner, the History of Westeros banner with the egg in the background.
Yeah, egg and a
Is that
dragon.
the right-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although the Twitter
Yeah.
variant I made does not have the dragon. It was a little busy for Twitter. I really wanted to highlight the text.
So now there's a few different versions.
A
Yeah,
few
it's not just one,
versions.
yeah. Some of the differences are just colors, but yeah, there's also some different designs. So check it out, folks. We're excited to have that.
So this is not a Highlander logo.
There can be several.
Yeah, there can be several.
You know, I have another plug to make too, by the way. I should have mentioned this to you earlier. And Shay, if you don't mind, I just sent you a message to the link.
Oh, yeah.
I'm doing the daily DVR with on Better Call
Oh.
Saul.
Very good.
Notably, I covered Better Call Saul last season on Daily DVR with W. Axel Foley. So that's awesome to hear, Sean. Great.
Yeah, I'm same WX Foley, daily DVR. I think the same thing you did last year. Wait, was that last year? Had to be a couple
It was
years
a couple
ago.
years.
for
I
Better
said
Call
last
Saul.
season.
Yeah.
Last
Oh,
season,
sorry,
not
okay.
last
Mhm,
year.
yeah.
To be clear, because
Nice.
yes, there
So
was.
wait, and when is this happening again, Sean?
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
I'm pretty sure we're going to record it Wednesday, and he'll have it up on Wednesday also.
Okay, great. We'll keep an eye out for that, folks. We'll share the link around our social media when it's out as well. Let's get going. Trivia question. Ib lies in the Shivering Sea, a great name, home to the oldest and largest of all the living creatures of the earth, according to the World of Ice and Fire. They may range elsewhere as well, but they're definitely in the Shivering Sea. What is this great sea beast? Answer at the end of the episode. Hint, it's not ice dragons, though if those do turn out to be real, well, you never know how big they'll be. So we'll throw a caveat that maybe ice dragons are actually bigger. But this is cited by the Maesters. So according to Yandel in the World of Ice and Fire. That. Again, answer at the end. Ib and the Ibnese, and that which has helped George R. R. Martin create them. It's a quote-heavy episode. We got a lot of influences today. You may recall us mentioning them in conjunction with Sarnor quite a bit, both in A Song of Ice and Fire and in Lovecraft's world. It's a neat set of influences. Clearly, as well, this episode fits very well as a companion to the Kingdom of Sarnor episode. You'll recognize a few of the names and places, and some of the historical events will come up again, but we'll be looking at them from the Ibnese side and maybe a couple other different angles. Right away, this appears to be an entirely different species. Maesters don't necessarily recognize them as that, but there seem to be enough differences to make that claim. Yandel says, quote, the Ibnese stand apart from the other races of mankind, and I want to start by kind of letting y'all weigh in, and you know, you've done a little bit of reading or a lot of reading on this. Tim, what do you think? Do you think they're a different species? I know we're not biologists here, but how do you think of it?
I look at them as like a diverging path of where humanoid creatures could go. I think when looking at Ib, there's three ways to approach it. Just like there's three ways to approach a lot of things in George's story, which would be the fantasy element, the Lovecraftian element, and the real world historical element. So in the fantasy element, the Ibnese seem to be like George's take on Tolkien's dwarves. The Lovecraft, there's the men of Ib, the creatures of Ib, the Thuma, as characterized as named by Lynn Carter later on in the mythos. And then there's the real world historical parallel, which would be, I think, of Neanderthals, and the idea of what if Neanderthals hadn't died out, but had lived and evolved next to Homo sapiens.
Right. Yeah, the Neanderthal one struck me as well. We have some notes on that later in the episode. Sean, what did you think? Did you think about this, or did it just immediately strike you one way or the other, and you didn't even think about it?
No, I definitely thought about it. I thought that it, of course, you know, my mind can spin a lot of different directions, and sometimes something like this wants me to clarify. Sometimes just the words we use are helpful in understanding something. Yeah. And so a race is like a human construct. Like biologically, there's no race of horses or whatever. Species is the most defined or narrow biological classification we have. And so it could be that the Ibnese are just a different race, and a species would be something you need to be able to mate with each other and have kids, which I think also comes up in the stories that the Maesters at one point say they can't, but we get stories of characters that say that they can. So there's clearly it's
clearly unclear.
Clearly unclear. But that was another thing too, like think about Neanderthals, that it could be that's sort of this generic term that we have for like ancient, pre-humans or cavemen or what. But there's really a lot of different branches and divisions of, I don't even want to say Homo sapiens, because there's even branches and divisions of different Homo species that have come and gone and interacted at different times. I don't know how deep George dug into all that science, and that's a lot of that science is just is more recent than what George was writing.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of that stuff is very new. Yeah, like they're constantly discovering new things.
I kind of decided that probably he's in this sort of big picture idea that Tim just said is, what if this, extinct branch of humanoid hadn't gone extinct, and the details of whether or not they can breed or how their physical appearance might be different. He probably wasn't quite as worried about the details of the science of it as just another unique group of culture and individuals to have in the mix that I wonder if he may have had some intent for that he never got to, or if he just wants to have some exotic stuff out there. Anyway.
Yeah, I agree with that, y'all. Those are good takes, y'all. What did you think, Shad? Do you have a thought on this?
Yeah, we do hear, like Sean said, about people from Ib and mixing with other people, and so, but we hear that there are some issues. So I think that makes sense, because I feel like if you're having a very large child, women are more likely to not be able to have that child. Like, I feel like it makes sense that it can work one way and not the other, if you know what I mean. Like, and that's kind of something that goes back to other thoughts that other authors have had about the idea of giants mating with humans.
Yeah.
Like, the idea that, like, a giant woman could mate with a human man, but it can't go the other way around. It just doesn't physically work. And I kind of feel the same way. Like, if you think about, like, the children of the forest, I wonder how much they could mate with a human who's also much larger than them. So I feel like it would work the same way with the children of the forest to human or to
That's a good point. I wonder too, and that's something I wanted to bring up, because the children are more explicitly a different race or different species. But Sean, you brought up the point about biology is something that can mate.
But I think that the children are still kind of homonyms. If you
kind of some form of hominid.
They're somewhat humanoid.
Because how do you classify something that sometimes produces viable offspring?
Yeah, I was going to say that you might be able to technically, biologically do it, but it might not physically work out, and
it might kill the mother.
And it's something, right? And so it's something that, especially over time, might either odds are not work out, and one race becomes extinct, or they become more and more separate, or maybe over time enough attempts do merge, and you get a new homogenization that can work or something. But and we don't really, and these types of things are measured in scales of scores of thousands of years. You know what I mean? Even as long as the history of Westeros is, it's not long enough for the evolution or merging of races to have come into play, as far as we could tell, not with any kind of historical. It's something H.P. Lovecraft, I can imagine, might have had some backroom experiment with someone trying to merge races.
I really like Christina K's comment here in the chat right now. She goes, "LOL, it's like Great Danes and Chihuahuas." Yes, try to picture that happening, and not going to work most of the time.
Like I have a Doxy, a Doxbull. They're Dachshund Pitbull mixes, and the Dachshund is the father, and so it's a question of like, well, how did he get up there?
Yeah, how did he even? That's a confident pup right there. Hey, mama, come here. You are tiny. Yes, but I've got lots of confidence.
And this platform.
Yes, as a step ladder, which is very important right now. So yeah, what no matter what you consider them, it's unusual because we look at the other creatures that may or may not be different species, that probably are different species. They're all like hiding or gone. The children, the Epicevron, they're either they're not extinct, but the Epicevron maybe, but they're certainly not out in the open. Very few people know they exist, even the children. And the Ibnese are just, they got cities and they're just out there. In every port you see, there's Ibnese sailors and ships. And they're just very commonly part of the backdrop. Until doing this episode, I didn't realize just how often there's Ibnese sailors or Ibnese ships here and there. It's constant. Like Catelyn, Theon, Tyrion, Daenerys. They all see Ibnese sailors. Arya, of course, because she's at the ports constantly. So that's really neat. Yeah, and the Ibnese, not only are they not hiding, they go everywhere. They're like Johnny Cash. They go everywhere, man. Ashai, Volantis, Lannisport, King's Landing, somewhere around. So yeah, not just the ports that we're familiar with, but the ports that we're not familiar with, and probably some other ones. They've got their own set of maps. They've got their own, they know stuff that the humans don't. They probably don't go, into the deep jungles of Sithorios. They like cold weather, but no one goes there, probably. Summer Islanders, maybe, but point being, Summer Islanders are also excellent navigators. They're the other great sailing people of the world. And they probably, likewise, have lots of secrets, places they've gone that most humans of Westeros and Essos don't know about. Thousands of years to explore and be bold seamen. But of course, seafaring isn't all they do. That's certainly why they're out there so much. But we're talking about an entire people here, an ancient civilization. So let's explore. Starting with our frequent first mention, the world of ice and fire. First mention right here.
The Lorathi also claimed dominion over the waters of Lorath Bay, but fishing fleets from Braavos and whalers and sealers out of Ib often venture into the bay, for Lorath does not have sufficient strength to make good its claim.
That quote we had in the Lorath episode. Same, for similar reasons. Lorath will come up a few times today, given their proximity as sometimes ally, sometimes enemy. But this isn't something that you get too bloody over, just fishing rights. I mean, in modern times, people can fight pretty hard for fishing rights, but I'm not sure there were giant wars fought over this huge region of ocean. I mean, people can fight over anything, but what's your take here, Tim? Do you think that we don't hear a lot about Ib and Lorath fighting, but these are two histories that history between the two of them may not filter out for the rest of the world. You know what I mean? Like, what happens between those two may not always make it into the Misters books.
Yeah, I think that it's since we never really hear much about Ib, and since we never really hear much about Lorath, like this unspoken history for them is probably something that the Maesters just don't really talk about. Now, if it'd be like a different story, if you were to actually go and talk to a Lorathi person, they probably have a different thing to say. And what strikes me is how Ib and Lorath used to be enemies and now are allies. And it kind of, like, when you think of like real world parallels, how often that happens. You think of like how often the British and the French were at odds, and now they're allies. And I think a lot of that has to do with Valyria coming into the picture. Things that that the enemies of old become the allies of new, because Ib also had the same back and forth with the Sarnori. What was once an enemy becomes an ally, and then as times change, and then things change, and then they go back to war, and they go back to bickering and infighting, and then another enemy appears. And I think Valyria had a lot to do with what really changed the relationship between Ib and Lorath.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and definitely the fall of Valyria had a huge impact on the changing of government in Ib, which we'll get to as we move forward through their chronology. We saw the same thing in Lorath. Lorath had very unusually distinct eras with different rulers, and that, I imagine, the Ibnese had different relationships with those different sets of rulers, whether they were the Andals, whether they were the Maze Makers, if the Ibnese ever even knew them, or the people that came along later, the followers of the blind god and all that. So yeah, different possibilities. Whereas Ib did have at least one major government change, the fall of the God Kings, which came not long after the Doom. It doesn't sound like they had as many upheavals prior to that, but there probably were some unrecorded things. Probably not as dramatic as wiping out the entire population, starting over again, like on Lorath, but still. Some interesting things, surely.
I can imagine a lot of the conflict might have played out at sea also. Kind of like, the British and the Spanish, ships attacking each other, sort of condoned by the governments, but you don't have all-out war. You don't have cities being taken over, but it doesn't mean there wasn't a conflict there. But the conflict might not have been definitive enough to have been tracked by history, This
Good
ship
point,
attacked this ship.
Yeah, right.
It wasn't like a named battle or anything.
The Battle of John and Bob. For some cod. Yeah, so they first appear in A Song of Ice and Fire in Dany 1. Hey, so the first mention is really early, and it's this exact same quote that's come up so many times now, underscoring how George R. R. Martin likes to introduce a high concentration of important elements in early chapters, especially because originally he was planning 3 books, so there was more he was trying to concentrate in a smaller space to set up, and then, eventually he realized he had a little more time. But y'all will definitely recognize this one. It probably won't be the last time we cite it either.
Eventually, he realized he had a little more time, he says.
Eventually. Yeah, that's out of context. That doesn't quite work, does it?
Okay, here's the quote. Many Dothraki horse lords, big men with red-brown skin, their drooping mustachios bound in metal rings, their black hair oiled and braided and hung with bells. Yet among them moved bravos and sellswords from Pentos and Myr and Tyrosh, a red priest even fatter than Illyrio, hairy men from the port of Ibn, and lords from the Summer Isles with skin as black as ebony.
So the presence of the 2 great sailing peoples there, the Summer Isles and the port of Ibn, the ibnese, is a little interesting given that there's a lot of other peoples not represented there, yet you have these 2 kind of far off ones. And I wonder if this was George gardening sailing nations, because he knew Dany was going to need a way to get over with her armies. Maybe he at this point hadn't decided it would be the Greyjoys. Maybe he thought maybe it would be multiple navies. So we got the Red Priest there. We can see how that ties in. We can see how Pentos ties into her. The Tyrosh and Myr, that's, sellswords and Dario, other stuff. That's less clear at this point, but you can see where it's going. Sean?
I thought of this as more 2 things, really. Maybe symbolic of the meaningfulness of this meeting. So many, right? How people from far and wide are, and also how word is going to spread. People from these distant places are going to take the news back.
That's a great point. Yeah, because anytime you have the sailing people around, the news is going to spread. Tim, would you have a take on this little passage here?
Yeah, I would say it probably is George planting seeds, but not every seed you plant sprouts.
True that.
It wouldn't be the first time that something George planned didn't go out. Like Dany was originally supposed to go to Ashai. That's not happening.
True.
The 5-year time skip. That's not happening.
Yep.
Sometimes it just like you said, it seems like he's laying some seeds, seeing what could grow in these particular seeds. Nothing substance-wise, at least for the main story grew. But as far as side stories like the World of Ice and Fire, well, that's where you really get your sprouts.
Yeah, definitely. Very good call. So let's move on to Ib itself. So we've got a little bit of setup from our first mentions and some ideas of maybe planting our own seeds on how the rest of this episode is going to go. Let's have our first quote on Ib itself, a description from the World of Ice and Fire.
Through the centuries, many different peoples have made their homes upon the shores and islands of the Shivering Sea and sent their mariners across its chilly gray-green waters. The most enduring and significant of these are the ibnese, an ancient and taciturn race of islanders who have fished the northern seas since the dawn of days from their homes upon the Ibish Isles.
So to be clear, Ib is an island. The nation is called Ibn, and Ib includes the port of Ibn and Ib-Nor, which is another city. Ib-Nor, it's kind of like north, and Farib, which is another island, but part of Ibn, the nation, contains the city Ibsar. Nina says Ibsar and Ib-Nor certainly remind me of the naming conventions of the Sarnori and the Rhoynar. You might wonder if there was some peaceful contact between those, and they may have influenced each other on language and certain cultural things, and as well as likely commercial / political alliances of other types that lasted and didn't last, and variety of ups and downs of history. There's like 4 other small islands directly south of Ib. We don't have names for them, but there's certainly people living on them apparently. And there's this town called New Ibish on the mainland itself. We'll have more to say about that, but that's also all part of the nation of Ibn. And the people, of course, are called the Ibnese. They live in this area called the Shivering Sea, which is this huge ocean, and the Bay of Whales, which is directly south of the island. So the name Ib is taken from Lovecraft's story, The Doom That Came to Sarnath, as we pointed out at the time. And Sarnath also appears as a Sarnori city now destroyed, Sarnath of the Two Towers, so some of y'all remember that. But there's a lot of other Lovecraft Easter eggs. Tim, why don't I let you go for a minute here and tell us about some of your favorite Lovecraft Easter eggs in here and elsewhere, if you want, on the map while we've got you here.
Sure. So with these Lovecraft Easter eggs, what George seems to do is he'll take the name and then he'll tweak it a little bit, make it his own, but then elements of that same Lovecraft setting will appear elsewhere. He does this with Ib, where Ib in the Doom of Sarnath is a city populated by these squisher-like beings that sits opposite the lake of Sarnath. Now here, he has it more of a different, they're not squishers, but squishers will appear in many different areas throughout the story. But he does keep sort of the gloomy gray setting that Ib of Lovecraft has. The port of Ibn is described as gloomy and gray. In Lovecraft's story, the men of Ib revere a stone idol of a water lizard called Bachrug. Now we've seen stone idols appear again, the greasy black stone. There's the toad statue on Toad Isle. There's the sea stone chair, things like that. These are Lovecraft things that George is taking and tweaking into his own. Then there's also places like Lang, Kadath, and Carcosa. And Carcosa is something that isn't even originally Lovecraft. That's something Lovecraft ripped from his own contemporaries.
That one's been passed down like the fantasy, like it's like a fantasy hand-me-down name.
And that's the thing with Lovecraft, especially like the Cthulhu mythos. It really is like a living, breathing text, because so many writers came after Lovecraft, from Derleth to Lynn Carter to James Bleach, and it's still ongoing with all the comics and video games. Like, there's been so many fingers in that pie, it doesn't have a crust anymore. It can be. That's why for Lovecraft fans, deciding what's canon and what's not canon, it's so hard, because so many different writers have come and gone and put their own spin on things.
Yeah, I don't even know how you would handle that. I feel like we're almost lucky with the Game of Thrones, where we really only have like show canon, book canon. Eventually there will be more. I mean, this universe is expanding. I mean, 20 years from now, 30, 50 years from now, there'll have been other people have put their finger in the pie as well. We're much earlier in that phase, I suppose you could say. But if you look at, there's plenty of other examples like that, where there's just games, books, role-playing games, and computer games. Sometimes multiple computer games. Sometimes other side games. Yeah, and it does get. Sometimes we take for granted how easy the canon is in Song of Ice and Fire compared to other fandoms. Star Wars eliminated like 100 books from their canon or something, and then some of them are being brought back in. Like, I don't even know. Yeah, it is. We do have it easy compared to that. Sean?
I was just going to make a joke. You said, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. Now, I want you to think about this. 51 years?
Oh, 51 years. That'd be so much.
52 years?
Whoa. You're going too far.
At least we have the knowledge that George has given his seal, like on things like House of the Dragon and possibly the Corliss show and 1,000 Ships and the Yi-Ti animated show. At least these have George's seal of approval while he's still with us.
Yeah, exactly. Unlike, say, Christopher Tolkien, who was just hating on the Lord of the Rings show before it even comes out. He's like, nope. Of course, he was mad with the movies, so it's not just the show. He didn't want the movies either. So, there's no pleasing some people. But hey, he's entitled to his opinion. Let's talk about the greater region, do a little comparisons. Here's another quote from The World of Ice and Fire. Your mouse.
Okay, I got it. It's so annoying. Ib is the second largest island in the known world. Only Great Morak, between the Jade and Summer Seas, is larger. Stony and mountainous, Ib is a land of great gray mountains, ancient forests, and rushing rivers. Its dark interior a haunt of bears and wolves. Giants once dwelt on Ib, we are told, but none remain, though mammoths still roam the island's plains and hills, and in the higher mountains, some claim unicorns can be found.
Now, George has compared it size-wise to Iceland. Now, not necessarily a lot of other things, but he also said the same thing about Lorath. It's rough. I mean, this is bigger than Lorath, but not a lot bigger than Lorath. And like Lorath, there's no volcanoes that we know of. Maybe there are, but it doesn't seem like it on a flat map. Now, of course, you always got a standard caveat looking at a flat map. Westeros isn't flat. The Planetos isn't flat, we don't think. So, there would be curvature. But if you're looking at it on a flat map, it's roughly parallel at the north point of Ib to Carhold. And at the farthest point south, the island, it lines up roughly with White Harbor. So it kind of gives you an idea of how far it is. It's kind of like a bracket. It's like a sideways Z almost. So it's not really much farther west than Karth. It's about as far east as Karth is, but just on the far north. So it kind of marks that anything past here is kind of unknown, sort of feel to it, especially on that side. Because on the south side, beyond Karth, we use E.T. and Ashai. I mean, those are mysterious, but they're not super mysterious. Well, maybe Ashai is super mysterious, but E.T. isn't. But up here to the east of Ib, there's just not much at all. It's kind of not just unexplored, but if it's explored by the Ibnese, they haven't told us. But there's not like a lot of civilizations. There's not like a lot of cities and people. It's not robust like E.T.
I wish I had annotated it, Aziz, but I remember reading somewhere, I'm pretty sure it was in The World of Ice and Fire, I'm pretty sure it was Yandel kind of speculating that, his perspective was it seems to be that the world is round. And if we could sail up through the north, we should come back down around the other side. It's just an interesting perspective of like the way we think about sailing
like a roller coaster.
Yeah. They were thinking of sailing like north around to the south instead of east around or west around to the east or whatever. But
if you get too far north, yeah, exactly. So
and that's the
go ahead, Tim.
I'm sorry. I was just going to go on because like they say like sailors have tried to find this fabled northern passage and they either get lost, their ships get stuck, or if they're lucky enough to return, they come back half frozen, just complaining that there's nothing out there. And we're told that the white waste, it grows and recedes. So it's kind of like, I think of it like the Arctic. Now, like Antarctica, underneath the ice, there is a continent, there's land, but the Arctic isn't. It's an ice sheet. It hugs like Greenland and Canada and the Russian far north, but there's no actual proper continent. And I kind of think like that's how the white waste acts. And that it's constantly growing and that it's freezing and then melting and then refreezing. And ships that are looking for a northern passage, since the weather and the seasons on Planetos are so unpredictable, you never have a good way of knowing like when the white waste is going to be open, when's the best time to sail through it, and what are the dangerous times when the waters behind you are going to freeze back over. Nice.
Okay, that's insightful. I didn't know that stuff. Do you think the Ibnese maybe have gone farther north than humanity? I keep saying human. I keep kind of phrasing it as if they're definitely a different species, but whatever. Question stands.
Actually, I do like the implication we get from that summer islanders, that their chart makers, their map makers probably have an idea of where the southern coast to the southern tip of Sithorios is. Like they probably know what's further south of the Green Hell, which is where the Maesters know. And I have a feeling that the Ibnese, because we get the knowledge that the 1,000 islands isn't actually 1,000, it's only about 300. That's because of knowledge that Ibnese map makers have been kind enough to share. So I do think that the Ibnese probably do know more about what's really out in the Shivering Sea. Like, if anyone's sailing to Mossavi, the far reaches of the east, it's probably them.
Yeah.
If there is a northern passage, if they know about it, well, that's definitely something they'd want to keep under wraps. You think of real world, how trade routes were kept secret, how the Dutch sat on trade routes and like sailing, and
really valuable.
Because you want to maintain control over that. And I think of like Karth and their control over the Jade Gates. Then there's there's the Saffron Straits that run through Ulthos, and I'm sure it's either Yeti or Ashai that are dominating that. Well, if there's any kind of passages in the Shivering Sea, Ib, being the foremost power, at least that we know of, would want to have that under lock.
My headcanon sort of is the 1,000 islands / the 300 islands are just kind of worthless, so that's why they don't mind sharing that. There's like, yeah, we don't care. You guys can know everything about this. There's no valuable trade routes there, right? Like it's all flooded, ancient, overrun. Yeah, there's nothing there. But ancient mystery and archaeology. No money, no loot, no value.
Or not just that, but too hard to get to it. Like we talked before about one value of maps is just knowing where you can approach an island, where it's not cliffs or coral or whatever. And it may just be all those islands, you just can't get a boat up to them. And so, go ahead and try.
Good luck with that. Our guest.
Like the Thousand Islanders don't seem like the type of people that are building ports.
Yeah.
Especially with how xenophobic they are. They're not going to be building anything that's going to allow ships to easily dock.
True that. And that's where the sea snake said the fish didn't even the fish from the sea didn't taste right. So you don't
that they were bitter. And that's also too, like, that's the farthest Corlys goes. And I don't doubt that Corlys probably would have continued further east if he could, but it was his crew. They saw those green-skinned fish people, and they're like, "No, you turn back now. We're not going any further. This is too much. This is too much."
You were wondering when it was too much? This is too much. We've found it.
I draw the line when the people start screwing the fish.
Yeah. When their teeth are sharp and they look half fish-like. That is too far. So you mentioned the White Waste. Is there any friendly competition between the Grey Waste and the White Waste? Is that do you guys have like a rivalry there?
Screw those White Waste guys.
It's all Grey Waste all the way. Yeah. So the giants, this thing about giants being extinct on the island of Ib, well, there's only really one way they could have gone extinct that I can think of, which is the Ibnese killing them all. Obviously, it wasn't other people coming there to Ib just to kill their giants. That doesn't sound very likely. So is that, Tim, where do you fall on this? Do you think this is accurate, or should we just take all these survey data that we get from Yandel and information about what is and isn't extinct there? Should we take a lot of that with a grain of salt? After all, later we're going to discuss that the Ibnese don't really let people explore their entire nation outside of this port, that you need a special invitation to leave the port. So how do we have any sort of confidence in things like giants are extinct on Ib? Like, why would we, how could we have confidence in such a declaration? Do you think they might still be around?
I do. I think we do have to take we have to take everything the Maesters say with a grain of salt.
Good point,
Fire and blood taught us anything.
3 grains of salt here at least, yeah.
But with the Ibnese being so protective over the interior of Ib, not letting anyone pass the port of Ibn without an escort, and how rare it seems like that those happen. Like, you really got to be some besties with an Ibnese person that seems to get past the port and actually see. So there could be definitely giants, mammoths, unicorns out there. It's like, think of the most well-guarded nature preserve. Like, we're not and it wouldn't, if the Ibnese being this sort of separate race and the way that they get treated by others, if they see how Westeros, and especially with them being on Essos and how rampant slavery is across Essos, they might see and be like, no, we're not letting yous in here to see all this because we've seen what you've done to your own native inhabitants. Think of how the giants have died out, how few giants are left in Westeros, and how giants are basically extinct in Essos. There were the stone giants that were killed by I believe it was the Jogos Nye.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Wiped out the stone giants. Yeah,
that's a great take. The other thing to consider potentially is that, as we explored in our episode When Giants Roamed with Crowfoot's daughter, there's a possibility the Ibnese have a distant relationship to the giants. Maybe the hairy men are like a interconnect, a midpoint in that branching, a connector perhaps. So it would be perhaps wrong to kill them if they're that closely related, or if they did kill them off, maybe that implies they aren't actually related. Nina suggests maybe it's like a keep to yourself situation. They leave the giants alone, the giants leave them alone. Maybe there's a little bit of trade, maybe there's a little tribute one way, maybe it's part of the deal. The Ibnese tell everyone the giants are gone so that no one comes looking for them. Yeah, like a little conservation. Yeah, maybe they have a little bit of conservation streak in them, or at least some of them do. I wonder if they ride mammoths, those giants, because they have mammoths. So if we have giants riding mammoths north of the wall, maybe they do the same.
I had a couple quick thoughts.
Sure.
I present this hesitantly because I'm not sure if George bothered to think that much about the science behind it. But it could be that giants evolved in separate branches in separate areas of the world, just like humans did on Earth.
Yeah, the stone giants were like twice as large as other ones, so they seem to be different.
And also it could be less sinister. The giants, if they are extinct on Ib, that it could just be some disease went through them that maybe even without realizing it, the ibnese might have spread it to the giants, and they just have more immunity, or they could just be using up more resources if the giants are a little bit less, I don't know, ambitious. It might not be active warring, but they just might end up turning more of their farm and hunting lands. The ibnese might just start using up more and more sources the giants have less.
Yeah.
Even if they're not completely extinct, pushed to such a small area, which again, the ibnese might have even recognized that was happening and are trying to curb that.
And tying all this together as well, the ibnese now are confined almost entirely to Ib, though not entirely, mostly confined to Ib, but at their peak, they had a chunk of Essos larger than their islands. So you wonder if in that era there were still some giants, or if they, I don't know if this necessarily needs to be a connected subtopic, but I think about that when they were at their largest versus when they're mostly just their island again.
You reminded me of a question I had, by the way. How we made a little bit of comparison to Ib to maybe Iceland, or if we didn't, we're going to. I was wondering, how does it compare maybe to Australia? Like size-wise, specifically, I'm actually asking, but maybe in other ways there's comparison.
Well, Australia is a lot bigger than Iceland, so I guess it would be, although Australia is an awful lot of it's unlivable, but at least for people.
So it was Iceland.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
it looks pretty big on the map.
It
like
does,
when if you compare, if it's accurate, if you compare it to like the north, it's like a pretty big section.
Well, George said same size as Iceland, and Australia is a lot bigger than Iceland.
Same size as Iceland.
I guess to be fair, when I think about it, on the traditional maps that we see here in the U.S., Australia doesn't look as big as it actually is either.
Oh yeah, the flat map thing kind of throws off Australia because it's in the corner.
Well, Ib isn't in the corner, so that probably isn't throwing it off.
Yeah, obviously Australia isn't literally in the corner. It's just how the maps always seem to present it.
It's like another common thing in real world maps. Like Australia's presented as smaller. A lot of times Tasmania is missing entirely.
Yeah.
Africa is always presented as smaller than it really is, and Greenland is all, and that's where I feel like Iceland. I mean, George says Iceland, but I feel like Greenland is a better comparison for Ib.
Okay.
Based on size, and also based on how hard it is to travel through there. Now with Ib, it's because they're not letting you pass the port of Ibn, but with Greenland, it's because of just how few roads there are, how few towns there really are, because most of it is covered in ice sheets.
Yeah, like ancient ice too, ice that's been there for like millions of years. It's wild to think about, isn't it? So unicorns, of course, we can't skip over that one either now, can we? First connection to unicorns, makes you think of Skagos. That's one of the only other places you hear of that. And Skagos is not on a different parallel too much. I mean, it's very far west of Ib, but only a little bit farther north. And it's also an island. And there's a prevailing theory that the unicorns are goats or woolly rhinos or some species that's similar to those. And there's also perhaps a genetic connection between the Skagosi and Ibnese. We'll come back to that. Nina suggests or mentions the note in The World of Ice and Fire that Yandel makes reference to disreputable merchants selling supposed unicorn horns that are actually whale horn that are hunted by the Ibnese, which would be a narwhal, right? Because narwhals are a real thing that have horns. And also apparently selling narwhal horns as purported unicorn horns could prevent poisoning. Apparently one of those can poison I don't know. So that's interesting. You wonder if, just like the giants, if there are giants there, they're not giving it away at all. They're not like selling their bones or anything on the market. Likewise, if there really are unicorns on Ib, they're not selling the horns on the market that we know of. At least if they are, they're so small. It's like a black market thing or such a small scale thing that it doesn't catch the attention of the maesters. But there's also dragon bones. So that is perhaps the most surprising because, while dragon bones are pretty widespread, cold weather environment, that doesn't quite sound, there's something a little odd about that. It's not crazy, but it's a little strange. What do you think, Tim? Do you think dragons lived there, or just a few maybe got killed there? If you think they got killed there, do you think they are Valyrian, or what do you think about? Also, if you want to weigh in on unicorns, feel free. But I think dragons, unicorns, any of the bones you want to weigh in on here, go for it.
Well, I think if dragons lived there, it would have been at a time because George hasn't gone too deep into the formation of Planetos. But if we think of like the continents of Westeros and Essos forming through the way Earth's plate tectonics did, how Pangea originally broke up, maybe there's a chance that dragons at once lived there, and then as Ib shifted and ended up in the colder environment, that's when they went extinct.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But that's going off of if we're talking like real world scientific, this is a fantasy story, so not everything's grounded in that. But one thing that I did mention earlier was how possible Valyrian incursions into Ib, and that's what drives Ib to ally with past enemies like Lorath and Sarnor. If it is if they weren't native dragons, but instead are the remains of invading dragons from Valyria. Like we've seen, like dragons, even though dragons are our like nuke metaphor, they are able to take down the Dorne went through so many years of independence because of their ability to kill dragons.
Yeah.
And it's possible that the ibnese, if they had to fend off Valyria, maybe some dragons went down and just and these are the remains of them.
It makes sense to me. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, keep going.
The other thing I think of too, though, is that how much of dragon bone that we know of that's stated here might actually be dinosaur bone. George also has played with the idea of dinosaurs. Like there's that creature in Sithorios. It sounds a lot like velociraptors. I believe the Sea Lord of Bravos keeps one as menagerie.
Yeah. And
then far out in the east, there's the Dry Deep and Bone Town, where they deal in strange bones. And maybe it could be like real world Earth. There are just certain hot spots for dinosaur bones, like the Gobi Desert. Or my fiance is a huge fan of Jurassic Park, and one thing she wants to do, she wants us to go to North Dakota because there are trips you can take there to actually go on a real dig for dinosaur bones, and you're allowed to keep things that you find.
Whoa, that's cool.
So you're telling me that the real deal with Bone Town is that I can go find some dinosaur fossils there, perhaps.
We were hoping it was a place where all the boning happens, but this is cool too, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know, boning or dinosaurs. Which would you choose?
Boning dinosaurs?
Get your mind out of the gutter.
No. So I do have a thought here on dragons and the ibnese. Now, this is potentially something cool. The ibnese intentionally go hunt the largest things. They go after whales. They hunt them specifically. And occasionally they run into even bigger things, bigger sea creatures, and they have to deal with that. They have harpoons. They're really good with this, killing large things. Would it really be that difficult to adapt a harpoon to shoot up instead of into the sea? So I could see how, the mechanism for how they killed a dragon or two could be something like this.
Yeah, you can kill a leviathan, a whale, a dragon of the water.
Exactly. So they specifically seek these things out. So those things don't breathe fire. Dragon's a little more dangerous. But if it was a matter of defense, like we said, the Valyrians come in, then shoot some harpoons at them, see what happens.
Yeah, they'd be familiar with the idea of they've got their weak points. They you can still go for the eye and the mouth,
or you hit the rider, because like a Valyrian steel might stop some arrows, but I don't know if Valyrian steel might a harpoon might just knock you out of your saddle, even if it doesn't pierce the armor. So yeah,
isn't Ib, like if you were to compare Ib across the world, how far north is it compared to the wall?
It's south of the wall.
by a little bit.
But not a huge amount, but yeah.
It's near the wall.
Yes. Remember the northern point of it lines up with Carhold, which is pretty far north. So yeah, it's maybe, I don't know, 100 leagues. I don't know.
We've gotten indications that dragons can't go beyond the wall.
Well, yeah, there is a hint to that. Yeah, is it the wall itself or the yeah?
Right, and I wonder, is it just binary, or is there just this magical line they can't cross, or is it the farther north they get, the weaker they get? They feel drained, they're cold, they don't like it, whatever it is.
Yeah. Birds with their magnetic, kind of, they can tell like parallels and longitude and stuff that we're not entirely sure what it is they're doing, but they have sort of locating and echo stuff. Maybe dragons have that too.
And so maybe while they're in it, maybe the dragon riders are like, "Hey, let's go check out or attack this island." When they get there, the dragons are like, "Well, slow down.
Yeah,
I'm
this is
dizzy
cold
now.
man.
Like I can't stay up this high."
Yeah,
and that makes it more vulnerable to being attacked or just falling out of the sky and ending up on the land and dying or being killed or whatever else.
Yeah, I mean, if they came for Lorath, why not come for Ib? It's they're kind of parallel, right? It just proved harder.
Yeah.
So. Let's see. Moving on, the Valyrian expansion into Ib. You've got a note here on slaves here, Tim. I think this is your note. So yeah, there's a big interesting note on Ibnese and how they're such a stubborn people that they are difficult to enslave, shall we say. They're not. They just won't do it. So a lot of them end up as in the fighting pits where where they're going to be violent. Well, that's where you get put. So what do you have to say about this? This is another reason why the Valyrians would have come to Ib for sure.
So it says like the Ibnese, they're too ugly for bed slaves, too savage to be field hands, and many end up dying in the Marinese fighting pits. And then that got me to thinking, well, how are Ibnese ending up in Marine? There's no direct sea route, at least not that we know, unless you're sailing east and
all the way
that allows you to go across where the map cuts out. Then the only way to sail from Ib to Marine would be go all the way back west down the narrow sea and then go all the way around Essos. So it's like, well, how are Ibnese ending up in Marine? Well, they're probably driven over there by land. And the Dothraki, definitely, if they're enslaving people, Ibnese on the Ibnese colonies on Essos, that's how they could get there.
That's
but
true.
Dothraki don't sail. So if there's actual native Ibnese from the island of Ib, then how they would end up in Marine to be in the fighting pits would mean they were being plucked by someone who can travel both land, sea, and also probably by air, which would be the Valyrians.
Yes.
So I see like Ibnese being corralled down into like Karth and Marine and places that far south, far away from Ib by the Valyrians. And like you said, like if they took Lorath, what's to stop them from going to Ib? Like you think Valyria as our Rome parallel, Rome would have kept going. They made it to Britain, and they would have kept going farther north if not for like Hadrian's Wall and the Scots.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that with how many Ibnese we've seen, it makes sense to me that they might have some small communities in different cities, around the world. Like in Lorath, there might be a small Ibnese community, just like how we have like a Little Italy or a Chinatown. There might be like Little Ib or something.
It wouldn't necessarily show up on the map, but
it wouldn't show up on the map. But if you live in Bravos, you're like, that's where all the Ibnese people live, is over in that part of Bravos.
That totally makes sense.
In Bravos in particular, I feel like there's got to be a good sized Ibnese population there.
Oh yeah, and there were Ibnese amongst the initial founders of Bravos.
Yeah,
so some of those were Ibnese slaves.
So a lot of the slaves and people in the fighting pits could come from some of those colonies and places around the world too, I think. Although
that makes a lot of sense. I like that. The Ironborn as well range that far. The Ironborn definitely go all the way to Ib, and so they would, while they can't, you don't have slavery in Westeros, they have thralls. They might. There's nothing stopping Ironborn from selling slaves in foreign markets. They just wouldn't be able to bring them back to Westeros. So they could take Ibnese, go sell them somewhere, and then go back home in Westeros with just their loot. So that's got to be a possibility as well.
I like the idea that the Ironborn try to take the Ibnese and fail,
I think I prefer that too, especially if it's a matter of slavery. Yes, absolutely. Root for the.
I had considered
root against the slavers in all cases. Yes.
Yeah. I had considered that maybe some of the ibnese slaves were just like ships that were captured or sailors that were captured.
Bound to be a few of those.
But I thought, I don't know how likely it is. They make the ibnese both as a people to be tough and as sailors and their ships to be tough. I don't know how likely it is for that to be the way they're getting captured and sold into slavery. Not impossible, but not the regular.
I agree with that. Also, it sounds like their ships are really tough, and like they've got harpoons, and they would fight really. Yeah, sailors aren't in general. Sailors aren't a soft folk, so and ibnese sound even tougher. So Tim, you've got to mention here about a couple other points here that are pretty interesting. Why don't you go ahead and walk us through some of these?
Sure. So when we're talking also about Tolkien's dwarves, one thing that made me think of was like how ibnese, aside from their homeland on Ib, they've basically been driven out of every other settlement that they tried to set up.
Yeah.
And that's like a lot like the dwarves in Tolkien. The waking of the Balrog leads to the destruction of their capital by the Moria. And then later on, they are driven again out by Smaug. So, but we think of if we think of this in Tolkien, so they're driven out by a literal dragon, but on a symbolic sense in this story, what would be the dragons if not Valyrians?
And that one Dothraki Khal we'll get to eventually, who was pretty important in driving them out. His nickname was the Dragon of the North. So there you go. That's awesome. Great catch. That's cool. And the Doom of the Valyria, you say that's compared to the Waking of the Balrog, right? That's pretty neat. That is.
Yeah. The Waking of the Doom of the Valyria has been compared numerous times to the Waking of the Balrog, and so that leads. So the Waking of the Balrog leads to the death of King Durin VI. And when if we're thinking this Ibnese dwarf line, well, the fall of the god kings of Ib coincides with the Doom of Valyria and the Century of Blood. And that makes sense. Like when you think of something as cataclysmic as the Doom of Valyria, something like that is going to have far-reaching ripple effects. This is where we see the old big power is down. Now everyone's scrambling to get to the new one to become the new power. This is where we see the rise of the Dothraki out in the grasslands, the fall of the Sarnori. This is the time for kingdoms to rise and kingdoms to die. It's make or break at this point. So it makes sense to me that major political upheavals would have happened, not just in Ib, but all throughout Essos. Everything that Valyria touched is now has to find a new way of doing things. This is how we end up with the free cities that we know with their constant skirmishes of everyone trying to be that next great big power.
Yeah, well said. It's kind of an odd mention here. Oh, go ahead, Sean.
Is Ib one of the free cities?
No.
Lorath
is.
I didn't think so. I just want to clarify.
Right. I think I would say more about Ib's not a free city, but with its proximity to the free city, and like I said, when an empire like Valyria falls, and I would imagine the same if we go back even further in history. Let's take the Great Empire of the Dawn and the successor states that came out of that, like Yi Ti and the Shadowlands. When a major empire falls, when you have been the world's #1 power for so long, like Valyria, 5,000 years of dominance, and then you're just wiped out basically in a day, that is going to have major life-altering impact on essentially everything around
global.
you.
Yeah, it's incredible. So there's a really odd mention in early on of the port of Ibn and mammoths. Tyrion thinks that Balerion was large enough to eat a mammoth from the wastes beyond the port of Ibn, which is such an obscure thing for him to think. And I'm like, I spent some time thinking about this. What does this mean? Is this why doesn't he mention the mammoths in Westeros, that, the one beyond the wall? He had been to the wall, that would have been fresher in his mind. So I wonder if George was trying to get us to think of Ibn, maybe think of the dragon bones, that were there.
Do you think it's ever possible that Tyrion saw a traveling animal show? A menagerie, came through Castor the Rock with an Ibnese whaler and a mammoth at the. It's kind of a crazy thought to picture, but you're right that him thinking of it makes it seem like he has, or maybe like he read a story when he was young that was about an ibnese whaler and like mammoths, and like it's just like stuck in his brain as a memorable thing.
For Tyrion, reading something makes sense.
Yeah, reading something makes sense. But that makes more sense than him transporting a mammoth across the sea. But someone doing that makes sense to me too, because you could make a lot of money by doing a traveling zoo.
That makes me think, oh, okay, so a couple of points is like, one, maybe ibnese mammoths are bigger.
Okay, yeah.
Like, we think,
like
we already talked about how
I think.
the stone giants were bigger than the Westerosi giants. And then real world example, how African elephants are larger than Asian elephants.
Ah, true, but considerably larger, right? Yeah.
And then also just the point that Shay brought up of like try to transport a mammoth across the sea. It's like we sort of see that the Golden Company trying to get
a whole bunch of elephants.
Yeah, that's true. You're right.
And Corlys also tried to bring elephants back to Westeros. They all died along the way, but he tried.
He did.
One other, I don't know, bit of insight. I'm pretty sure as a kid, I wish I could give a better number, but I'm guessing as a 5-year-old kid, I knew what a tiger was and a lion was. And I knew they were big cats from Africa or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know that there were cougars in the Rocky Mountains. I don't know if I was aware of that as a kid, that there were lion-type cats near me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So I can imagine Tyrion, like you were saying, like maybe read a book or saw a drawing as a young kid and had this image of mammoths from Ib and didn't even know there were mammoths in Westeros.
That's possible, yeah, sure. So let's move on to Farib, which we have a description of, and it will spark some more discussion.
Farib, the second largest of the Ibnese Islands, lies more than 100 leagues south of Ib itself and is altogether a bleaker and poorer place. Ibsar, its only town, was originally a place of exile and punishment, where the Ibnese of old sent their most notorious criminals, often after mutilating them so they might never return to Ib itself. Though that practice ended with the fall of the God Kings, Ibsar retains an unsavory reputation to this very day.
Now, no shade on Australians, but that is how Australia started as a prison colony. That's not how it started entirely. That's how it started. The British started using it. Obviously, there were people there already, but prison islands are a thing in fiction and the real world. I mean, Gaston Grey is a prison island in Dorne. Dune has the famous planet Seleucia Secunda to create the Sardaukar and all that. So that's a pretty big recurring thing. That also makes it kind of interesting. You're like, what has happened here? That's fascinating. There's another one I could think of. John Varley, the author John Varley, had Pluto become a prison planet in the far future, or Charon, the moon of Pluto, became a prison planet. And the same kind of thing, like eventually the bad guys just started coming back off of, they built ships and became like this solar system mafia. Anyway, kind of neat, but very much off topic. What is the thing about mutilating them first? That's nasty. Nina says it reminds her of Byzantine political mutilation. You blind them or cut off a limb or slit the nose, something that makes you really blatantly, visually, quote unquote, imperfect, which disqualifies them for high office. So it's a little nicer than just killing them, but it's still really gruesome. The mutilation similarly might permanently make them shunned. Like it's something you can't not see, and so everyone's going to know you're a criminal. You were judged a certain way. What do you think about all this, Tim? What are your thoughts on Ibsar?
I did add in the notes. So, like when we think of mutilation as a punishment, like branding can be used as a punishment.
True, or
use
tattooing,
the example of the Scarlet Letter.
Oh, yeah.
How you can, certain criminals will have like a letter branded into their skin, like T for thief, A for adulterer, B for blasphemy, and things like that. And it also made me think more of like Tog Joth. He's the Ibnese member of the Brave Companions, aka the Bloody Mummers. If this is where these are, because the Bloody Mummers are supposed to be made up of criminals and outcasts. And it makes me think, like, we never get a physical description of this character.
True.
But if there were an Ibnese criminal in the story, he'd seem like a prime candidate. So maybe he's one of these scarred Ibnese who's like, I can't return home because this.
They know. They would immediately
marks from being able to return home.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
another thing I've thought of, I'm a big anime fan, and two things I'm really excited about are the return of Bleach and the return of Hunter x Hunter chapters. And if there's any Hunter x Hunter fans in the audience, they might know of the Kaken Empire, where their bastard children of the Emperor are scarred with they're scarred over their face, and this is to show that they are a royal bastard, but is to nullify any claims to the throne that they can have. And I just thought the idea of like mutilation for that just seemed like interesting to me as a way of just marking someone to stand out, so that they're always an outcast, they're always otherized. Someone can always look and be like, I know exactly what you are.
Yeah, there's been lots of real world examples of this. They're not always mutilation. Sometimes they're just you have to wear something. But yeah, it's the same concept. Yeah, marking somebody's other. It's really terrible.
I do want to find some I don't know how to say it. It's a positive light to shed on the ibnese. It did say they're most notorious criminals.
Yeah.
So they didn't just do this willy-nilly to
Yeah,
anyone.
it's not just
you had
anybody.
to really be.
Yeah.
And even a notorious criminal, they didn't burn him alive. They mutilated him and sent him off. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I could think of worse ways for
Absolutely
things to be handled.
Absolutely. So on the other hand, as far as the island itself, it started off as a prison island. Apparently that's changed. Some of these practices have changed over time. But also, I think it would be a trading portal to the farther east over time, if not already, because it sits closer to the Bone Mountains. It's not, right there, but you can thus see that it would be a place to stop off if trading with someone like Mossavi or Nefer, assuming they even do that, because it's closer than Ib. But that's just a guess. Let's talk about the actual port. What's that?
City. I said Nefer is a port city.
That's
it's
true.
The easternmost port that we know of.
That's true. So I would guess that they are trading with it, but we just don't know for sure. What do you think? Do you think they're trading with there?
I'm not sure. That's the thing is, when I think of Nefer, I'm not sure of how much they have left to offer because so much of the city has been destroyed. Like,
that's true.
When I think of Nefer, where Nefer lies. If you look at it on the map, it's got so to the north is the Shivering Sea, to the east is Mossavi, to the west is Jogos 9, to the south is Yiti. They're surrounded. I think of Nefer as being in this like Poland situation.
Oh wow, yeah.
like Nefer's the Belgium of the world.
The Belgian necromancers. Let's talk about the port of Ibn itself. As Tim said before, it's got that gray and gloomy feel that's been brought over perhaps from the story The Doom That Came to Sarnath. And look what the first line is in this quote. Shea.
Gray and gloomy, the port of Ibn has ruled over Ib and the Lesser Isles since the dawn of days. A city of cobbled alleys, steep hills, and teeming docks and shipyards, lit by hundreds of whale oil lamps, suspended over its streets on iron chains. The port is dominated by the ruins of the God King's castle, a colossal structure of rough-hewn stone that was home to 100 ibnese kings.
Right there, you get an idea of the way things are set up. The God King's castle is at the port. It's not inland. It's not somewhere else. It's right there in view of the port, which is the key to their wealth and trading with the wider world, which is the key to their wealth. So that tells you a lot about how the society was set up from the beginning. And they still use this port is obviously still perhaps the most important basic facility in their entire civilization, even though the colossal structure is no longer of the castle is no longer in use. Trade in whales, bone and blubber and oil, those three things that come from whales, has made them the largest and richest city of the Shivering Sea. I bet those are good lamps. Let me tell you, you do not deal in flammable material without a certain measure of fire discipline. Like hundreds of oil lamps, man, you gotta just one of them going wrong, all the rest of them go off. Yeah, you want to buy ibnese oil lamps, I think. Yeah.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but it was something I was thinking about. Yandel even kind of made the point that the ibnese maybe are thought of as oafs or whatever, just because of their physical appearance. They don't talk much, but really they're actually kind of savvy and,
Yeah.
developed culture or whatever. The idea that some bold, tough, strong sailor hunter goes out and kills a whale. Think of the different types of skills and processes that need to be cultivated to make that valuable, right? How quick do they need to harvest that meat before it spoils? How do you turn that oil into a lamp without setting everything on fire?
Yeah.
There've got to be all sorts of tradesmen and craftsmen and such to
Knowledge
make
passed
this
down.
enterprise
Yeah.
worthwhile. Yeah.
Totally true. Yeah, you're right about that, I think. So the port of Ibn is brought up a number of times. As we alluded to earlier, it being kind of and has this end of the world feel similar to Karth or maybe Ashai or some of these just far away places. Ned actually suggests when he confronts Cersei and says you need to go, you need to leave, he suggests the port of Ibn. He also suggests the Summer Isles, which is smart because if I were Cersei, I would totally choose the Summer Isles. Like, why would you go to the cold place when you can go to the warm place? But yeah, your mileage may vary. Jon also considers sending Arya there if she shows up at the wall. He doesn't think of the Summer Isles as possible. Bad call, Jon. You should have thought of that. And Dany, as we said, saw them right away. Men from the port of Ibn at Illyria's Manse, right there in her first chapter. Obviously, Arya sees them quite a bit. She's at the port, at the Ragman's Harbor and in other ports on Braavos, and Braavos being relatively close to Ib, there's all sorts of back and forth there. So yeah, Nina takes this a step further. She says, yeah, they treat it less as a specific place than just the most distant place they can think of. It's like it's a concept to them, and they haven't been there, right? They just know of it. Just kind of, to someone from Westeros, it's one of the most remote places that you can actually go to. Ashai is just kind of too far away. In some ways, it can take like a year to get there, or more, maybe even longer. But and unlike Ashai, which is not a lot, people aren't just going there all the time. there's fewer flights to Ashai. Let's put it that way, right? But Ib, it shouldn't be that hard to find a ship to Ib because they're just like we said, they're just ships to Ib are popping up all over the place, and they're probably most of them are going back there at some point because it's not like there's other ibnese ports around the world for them to go home to. Sean.
Going to Ib wouldn't be that much of a challenge, but randomly passing by Ib is not a likelihood.
Yes, yeah. You go to Ib and then you go away. You don't go like beyond Ib and then past it. There's not a lot of that. Yeah, it is the last stop for most of the time. Tim, what do you think about this?
Yeah, it seems to like have this feel of remote enough that nobody's going to go there asking questions, but accessible enough that they could always return, that you can come get them when like in the case of sending Arya there, it's like, okay, when things die down, well, we can get her back. You can't really, that's not a guarantee if you're trying to send somebody as far away from as a shot.
Yeah. Yeah, especially because you're like, you can't count on the ships as much either. You're like, well, this is Ibnese whaler. She's going on, like, that's a more dependable ship. Yeah, there's a lot more that. Yeah, this is a lot about this that makes sense. Yeah,
and it makes me think of like when Davos arrives at the Three Sisters, he's transported there by an Ibnese, a half Ibnese sailor that's Kaso Moget. So it seems like the Ibnese also have more of at least a bit of a duty and honor to them, that you can negotiate with them, and that their chances are they're going to keep their word.
Yeah, and
that they'll take you where you need to go, and they'll make sure you get there safely.
Maybe that stubbornness is part of it. If you have someone who's stubborn, and they're stubborn, apparently as racially, that's apparently a thing. Culturally, they're considered stubborn. If you're stubborn and you're a good person, well, you're going to be pretty stubborn sticking to your morals. I think that sometimes stubbornness is a good thing. It's like one of those things that's kind of a neutral. Stubborn by itself isn't necessarily bad or good. It depends on what you're stubborn about. Like efficiency. Like efficiency sounds good, but what if you're efficient at killing children? That's not good. So
well, if we think of like the Ibnese Skagos relations, it's like that northern stubbornness, like the sticking to your word type stubbornness. Like, I'm going to see this. I made a promise, so I'm going to see it through, come hell or high water.
Yeah, when sincerity counts for more in some of these cultures. Yeah.
Sometimes stubborn might be associated with closed-minded or I don't know, maybe even selfish, but sometimes it's associated with honor or determination.
Yeah, like I'm closed-minded about breaking my word. Like I'm not open to that. And that's okay. Well, that could be a very good thing, something very dependable. So in addition to like the sea snake and these other conversations about people maybe gone there, sea snake definitely win. Mushroom went there. From Dance with Dragons fame. There's a passage in Fire and Blood talks about all these other places he's been, like Bravos, and it's like, but it's beyond the scope of us to talk about this, even though it would be fun to. We're like, yes, George, write that one day. The Adventures of Mushroom. No, he's got too much on his
George
plate for
does that so much,
does.
where like with Mushroom, where he says we must turn away from the little man for now. It's like, no, I want to hear more about the testimony of Mushroom.
We must not turn away from. Here's our next quote, Sean.
Is this on Ib itself? Yeah. On Ib itself, men of other lands and races are restricted by law and custom to the harbor precincts of the port of Ibn and forbidden to venture beyond the city, save in the company of an Ibnese host. Such invitations are exceedingly rare.
So you wonder why. I mean, maybe it's just this stubbornness. They just don't want people messing around with their stuff. Just easier to keep it all under control if there's no one there. Maybe they care about the environment. Maybe they have some customs, religion stuff they want to keep a secret. Mineral wealth they want to keep under wraps. Like, there is gold, for sure, on Ib. Maybe they want to keep that secret. It could be all the above. We are talking about how they want to keep their ocean maps safe. They got some trade secrets. Maybe they want to keep this spills over into their land maps. They also want to keep that under wraps. So I wonder, like, if y'all in the chat, in the comments, have other things they might want to keep secret, if it's just spitballing, just any kind of consideration, hit us with it. And Nina suggested maybe it's that whole giants thing. If they're going to keep giants, the existence of giants a secret, well, that would be one thing. It's probably not just that, though. I doubt that this whole thing is just to keep giants a secret. But that could be part of it. I could see that. Do Tim or Sean, either of you guys have any other ideas, just possibilities, things that popped in your head, things they might keep secret? Looks like Sean, looks like you're ready to go.
I had a couple thoughts.
Okay.
One was the Lorathi seemed kind of similar, right? They
At
built
least
these
one
mazes
version of them,
to kind
the
of
maze makers ones.
seemed to be attempting to limit travel inwards. Another thought is that, and this maybe isn't quite as exciting or fantastic, but it's not new. Environmentalism isn't even new, right?
You're right.
To modern times. Like Ben Franklin was determined to come up with a more efficient stove because he saw forests being leveled,
Yeah.
And it's been a constant problem of as big cities have arrived. Paris was just gross with pollution. I can imagine this port, they can just kind of see what the effects of a bunch of people being around has on the environment.
Yeah,
like, we don't want that to happen to our forests and our homes. So
That's a good
everyone
point.
this place is already a mess. Fine, but don't spread it any further.
Yeah, they don't want like other operations setting up like logging operations or other. Yeah, just nope, none of that.
Just all the human waste that
Yeah.
would come and
What do you think, Tim?
So.
Yeah, I think it's it can be a lot of that. Like again, like if Ib looks across the Shivering Sea to its neighbors, and you see these slaver cultures, these dominations, the way that other. And with Ib being so different, because the question's still up in the air as to whether they're just another race or another species. But you see how humans just treat other humans, and again, this question of what if Neanderthals had lived? Well, how would they have been treated by regular Homo sapiens? It's like there probably would have been. I think. Their extinction was probably inevitable because of how otherized they would be by other humans, and I think Ib kind of sees that. It's sort of a pessimistic way of looking at things, but when this is the thing that you're surrounded by, it's the thing you see on a daily basis, it sort of makes sense, like why they would want to close themselves off.
Don't even let them get that foothold. Just don't even let it start. Yeah.
And then if we're thinking too, like Ib as an island, it's like, well, let's another real world example would be like Japan during the shogunate period, how Japan isolated itself from the world. You might want to just look and be like, well, look at them. They're barbarians. Like, they have nothing of value that we need. Why should we allow them to be in here? There's nothing they can offer us. And we want to just keep ourselves in, keep everything within.
Close those borders. Yeah, you can see that. Yeah, it makes some sense. Okay, why don't we take our mid-roll break here, take a few questions, say hey to some folks. Aaron R. from our Facebook group said, isn't the Bale the Bard story a reference to Robb and Lord Karstark? I have wondered about that too. The problem is, yeah, certainly when he's about to be executed, Karstark says, then kill me and be cursed then, we're kin. He's like, I don't know that I believe they're kin. Like Karstark says that. I mean, as far as we know, there hasn't been a Karstark-Stark marriage in like 1,000 years or something like that. So are they really? Does that really count as kinslaying? Maybe it does. But I'm skeptical. Still, these events are relatively close together in the book, right? The killing of Lard Karstark and the Bale of Bard story. So, yeah, I don't know. It's possible that's what's being referenced, but I wanted to throw that out there because I'm like, it gets us part of the way, but I don't know. It's close. Certainly, the Bale of Bard story fits in a lot of places and is a great story. So we don't have to solve it all right here, but I thought Aaron R's comment was worth throwing out there. Sean, you had a couple of comments here. Looks like from some past episodes that you wanted to reference real quick.
From the chat last week, we were talking about in the Red Kings episode about how Roose wanted to kill Barristan.
Yeah.
Wanted to execute him, and I think it was it Ned telling the story of how Roose wanted? He was talking to Renly,
yes.
And how Roose wanted to kill Barristan, but
exactly.
But Robert was like, and so we had different takes on it, and some other people in the chat did too. Gerald G was pointing out that Roose wanted to execute Barristan, not necessarily all prisoners. That Barristan maybe was a special example, so someone maybe for the sake of example should be executed. Which I don't know if I necessarily agree or like that. It's a good point. I think Robert wanted to spare Barristan as an example. Robert probably did kill a lot of other people.
Yeah, Robert wanted to spare as many people as possible. That was his thing. Yeah, to bring them over.
And I was also pointing out there was what seemed to be, I don't know, a discrepancy or hypocrisy in Ned, because at one point he says, in talking about that moment with Barristan, he says there's that mercy is never a mistake. Yeah. But then he chops off Jared's head from the wall. And she pointed out that it isn't necessarily hypocrisy. He might have changed his mind. He might see things differently. Years in a leadership position, might have a new perspective. That's so kind of sad to me that he would learn over time that sometimes mercy is a mistake. Even though I kind of agree that it might be, but it is still kind of a dark thought.
Yeah.
And then finally, Guilty Undertaker pointed out that Ned / Roose / Robert, any of them, I think he was talking specifically about Robert's reasoning, but that, or maybe Ned, sorry, anyway, that Barristan's highborn, and it maybe he gets a certain exception.
Yeah, even someone like Ned might not realize his own prejudice for other highborn folk. Even Ned's not immune to that, for sure. So that could very much be in the back of his head. So another point several of y'all wrote in to correct me on a point of Zoroastrianism. There is fire worship in Zoroastrianism, and several of y'all pointed out some examples, and I was thinking to myself, how the heck did I miss this? So I had to go back and look it up, and there's actually a very simple reason. First of all, they have things called fire temples, which I'm like, really, how did I miss that they have fire temples? It's called an agiary. It's a spiritual medium to them. Fire is revered like clean water as an agent of purity. Holy white ash. A lot of these fire temples, they generate holy white ash. You bring in sandalwood. A priest burns it for you. They give you the ash. It's like purified ash. You take it home. You do stuff with it, like different rituals. Where I appeared to go wrong is that the fire worship wasn't initially part of Zoroastrianism. It was a reform element. It was around for as long as 2,000 years, potentially, before the fire worship started. Quote, no actual ruins of a fire temple have been identified from before the Parthian period, which is the 4th century BC, and Zoroastrianism may have started as far back as 2600 BC. So fire altars began to replace what were icons and effigies. And then eventually, and long after that, they all became mosques because then Islam came along. So, yeah. So that explains the confusion. I was studying for my references just early Zoroastrianism and didn't realize that the fire stuff came along later. So that connects a nice dot. And I definitely encourage y'all to point out my mistakes. I would much rather get it right than just be seen as, than just to pretend I was right in the first place. And that way y'all know, that way you can trust us to fix our mistakes when we make them. Also, Karen Targaryen pointed out that Freddie Mercury was raised Zoroastrianism, which is really cool. I'm like, really? That's awesome. I'm a fan of Queen. So is Ashea. So over a lot of y'all, I'm sure. Let's talk about the Ibnese people. Here's a nice lengthy quote to get us started. Ashea.
The Ibnese stand apart from the other races of mankind. They are a heavy people, broad about the chest and shoulders, but seldom standing more than 5.5 feet in height, with thick, short legs and long arms. Though short and squat, they are ferociously strong. At wrestling, their favorite sport, no man of the 7 kingdoms can hope to equal them. Their faces, characterized by sloping brows with heavy ridges, small sunken eyes, great square teeth, and massive jaws, seem brutish and ugly to Westerosi eyes, an impression heightened by their guttural, grunting tongue. But in truth, the men of Ib are a cunning folk, skilled craftsmen, able hunters and trackers, and doughty warriors. They are the most hirsute people in the known world. Though their flesh is pale, with dark blue veins beneath the skin, their hair is dark and wiry. Ibnese men are heavily bearded. Wiry body hair covers their arms, legs, chests, and backs. Coarse dark hair is common amongst their women, even on the upper lip.
So most Fridays I do a Crusader Kings 2 stream with the Game of Thrones mod. It's a very thorough conversion of real world into Westeros. And there are Ibnese people. There's all the races are represented in the typical way you see that is just a regular portrait of someone else. Like it would be a Westerosi person, but they just put a mustache on, a woman. This is like, you just like princessy looking character and it's just like a mustache. It's just like, that's that. Now she's Ibnese. That's all it takes.
I do wonder when I read that description about like Ibnese definition and ideals of beauty.
Yeah. What do they think?
Are they like,
look at her
oh,
mustache.
she's got the smallest eyes, man. Like they're so small.
Oh, that sounds so hot.
The teeth are so square. They're perfectly square.
That's a mustache you could really twirl around your finger.
I want to ride that mustache. Yeah. Mustache rides are very popular in Ib.
But no, you had some failures with your Ibnese lover.
Oh,
in Crusader Kings. They do have that built into the game
the sterility thing. Yeah.
Aziz was like, I'm not gonna have another Ibnese wife after this one.
Yeah, you would think I'm some sort of Ibnese racist the way I play on the Crusader Kings because you constantly have like stillbirths and hunchbacks and all sorts of genetic diseases and malformities, and you're just like, yeah, no, don't. We're not doing that again. And we tried it with our YT campaign. We're like, maybe we should try some Ibnese. Nope, it was a bad idea. It was just heartbreak. Lots of dead children. It was terrible.
I've seen the like Clash of Kings videos people have done of like trying to create the most inbred dynasty ever. And that's like a thing too. It's like we never got to see a Targaryen with a Habsburg's jaw.
Yeah, George never went there. Maybe he should have. He just put it all in mental health. He never had them get ugly or
that's the
weird
Targaryen
formation.
exceptionalism at work, right?
Yeah.
Who programs that Crusader Kings mod? That's very thorough. That's like
it's a big team.
It's incredibly
that does it.
thorough.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, you could work on it if you wanted to. You could sign up, and it's like that open to where you could join.
Okay.
They're currently working on Crusader Kings 3 for the mod for that, and it's taking them a long time because it's a very complex thing to do.
Like you click on a character's portrait, and you click on Ned Stark, and you can follow his family tree all the way back.
Even
like
though in canon you cannot follow that family.
They have to
back.
make up places to fill in the gaps where they don't have the information. But yeah, it is incredibly thorough. Yeah, it's like a role-playing game with dynasties and every little aspect of George R. R. Martin's world that you can imagine.
Yeah, I'm frequently very impressed by that team. I think for being very thorough and for the stretches, the leaps that they make in canon because they have to fill in the gaps. They work a lot of the time. Like I'm rarely like, really? You did that? I'm usually like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like that makes sense as a Stark name, or that makes sense as it checks out to me.
Yeah, you give Littlefinger 30 intrigue, and like a really high score for that. Or Varys, same thing. Like, yeah, that
you made George
sense.
R. R. Martin a genius in the game. Of course,
right.
George Martin.
So let's talk about bring it back here. Sterility claims, as we mentioned earlier, a little contradictory. The Maester say it doesn't work either way, whether with a male or a female partner for an Ibnese. But Brown Ben Plum says his grandmother was half Ibnese, half Cohoric. Casso Mogat, that Tim mentioned earlier, was fathered on a Sisterton sex worker and an Ibnese whaler, according to Davos. Casso was being mothered by a woman of Sisterton as well, because of the Sisterton people have the mark sometimes, the webbed fingers. So already something else is already maybe other physical traits that indicate this person's a little different.
Well, right. I just want to say right off, I think it's interesting that Casso Mogat is presumably the Ibnese whaler is a man and the Sisterton sex worker is a woman. So that would be an example of a successful male Ibnese person with the female, which is the opposite of what I was saying. I felt like it would be more likely for the opposite to happen.
So yeah, it's pretty.
Maybe it was a female Ibnese whaler and a male Sisterton sex worker. You don't know. We don't know.
So some other possibilities here. Tim, why don't you take over for a sec? What do you think about? You mentioned Tog Joth already, but what are some other ones?
So this was an idea presented to me by Austin Flowers, who may or may not be in the chat.
Hey, Austin.
He's been on streams with me a while and went for a couple streams. And during our Aegon the Third stream, somehow Ib came up, and he had brought up the idea of possibly Marwyn the Mage being someone who has Ibnese blood. Marwyn's description: short, squat, broad in chest with sloping brow, huge jaw. Abundant facial hair, large forelimbs. This all sounds like genuine Ibnese features, and we're also told that he speaks Ibnese and apparently speaks it fluently. He speaks with Ibnese sailors, and he also speaks with Summer Islanders in their own tongues. Yeah. So he's like this is a man whose culture,
super comfortable sailing too, right?
A man who knows a lot of things, and Marwyn already kind of skirts the line of normal Westerosi. So for him to be at least partially, maybe not fully Westerosi, might make him more open to the ideas that he has, if he has like another cultural outlook on things.
Yeah, I'll say straight up, I've always thought that Marwyn has to be part Ibnese. I think that the description for him, like, it's just very clear to me that, like, it's the same kind of thing I feel like George is channeling, where like some of us are part Neanderthal still and look more Neanderthal, like that is the discussion. Like, you can see it in someone's sloping brow. I think George was channeling that specific thing here with a closer connection, but
you're right. Like, I think it's something like 1% to 4% of people who have of DNA from above the Sahara have that much Neanderthal blood. Sub-Saharan DNA has only like a tiny percent of Neanderthal DNA.
Yeah, and so I think Marwyn would have more than just the tiniest bit of Ibnese, though. I think so.
An exception, you say,
like
Sean?
Her grandmother is.
Aboriginal Australians or indigenous Australians have something like 4% Neanderthal.
Oh, okay. So I was thinking continental, because most Neanderthal activity was in Europe and England. Well, I guess England is before England would have been separated. There would have been Doggerland.
It was like
it and all that.
It was the parallel I was thinking about with Australia. Both the criminals being sent there, they have a percent. The Aboriginals having a percent of Neanderthal in them. Not sure how strong it is or how much Martin was thinking or even aware of that, but
okay. Anything else to add, Tim?
I was just thinking, like, how many people trace their ancestry back to Genghis
Oh,
Khan,
yeah.
and that's just coming from one man.
Yeah.
I mean, Neanderthals, even at their peak, were probably only numbered around 50,000, but that does give more of an ability for that DNA to just kind of like to stay more, to linger on further. If we have all these people that can just trace themselves back to one particular person.
A population of 50,000 200,000 years ago is a much higher percentage of the entire population than it would be now. So it's going to play out bigger over time.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I gotta say, I really wish they have those like Ancestry.com and stuff like that. I wish they told me like how much Neanderthal I was.
Oh yeah,
I would love that.
That would be kind of fun to know, yeah. So Arya as well, when she's blind, when she's the blind girl, she is able to identify Ibnese sailors by smell, which is interesting. Partly it's because they're Ibnese sailors like the whale smells is part of it. I don't know how much of it is them. Like, that smells like an Ibnese, or it's just, that smells like a whaler, and that is probably Ibnese. It's not clear, but I think that, with developing her senses, and she's also, it's implied that while she's blind, she's also using that cat's nose a little bit, so, as well as that cat's eyes. So she's got cat senses boosting all of, that her sense of smell is going to be a little more sensitive if she's using a cat nose instead of just her human nose. That reference to wrestling brings up Bear Island, huh, Tim?
Yeah, like, I made me think, if all our disputes could be solved with wrestling, then it would rule the world.
Yeah, that's the system they want to bring in.
Like, if we think of that because we don't know who, I don't think we know that Bear Island was won through a wrestling match, but who the actual combatants were. And if we have this Skagosi connection to Ib, then that also could mean, and we know that there's been Skagosi marriages into the Starks, so maybe the particular Northmen who wrestled the Ironborn for control of Bear Island might have some Ibnese ancestry.
Nice. They were like, we're setting this up in advance. All right. We're gonna plan a wrestling match in 2 generations, and to prepare for that, we're gonna breed some Ibnese blood into our. It's a long-term plan. I like it.
It might be a little trouble every now and then. You're gonna have a Gregor the Mountain come along and suddenly.
Yikes.
Put up a challenge to the Ibnese.
That's true. I wouldn't want to wrestle Gregor. Yeah. No thanks. So overlapping the idea that they don't like outsiders too much for whatever reason, I think we went through some cool suggestions for why that is. We get even farther with that. The rural Ibnese folk are even more distrustful of outsiders, even more independent-minded, perhaps. Here's a quote.
The Ibnese of the woods and mountains have even less love of strangers than their cousins by the sea, and seldom speak any tongue but their own. Foresters, goatherds, and miners, they make their homes in caves or houses of gray stone dug into earth and roofed with slate or thatch. Towns and villages are rare. The Ibnese of the interior prefer to dwell apart from their fellows in solitary compounds, gathering only for weddings, burials, and worship. Gold, iron, and tin can be found in abundance in the mountains of Ib, as well as timber, amber, and 100 sorts of pelts in the island's forests.
So again, that sounds a little bit like Iceland with the separate communities and the terrain, and it fits with the size as well. And one of the anecdotes just after the scouring of Lorath by the Freehold of Valyria, Ibnese would stop there to refuel or to get some trees or some food, but they wouldn't go inland because it says the Ibnese believe that if you go beyond the sound of the sea, you're cursed. It's like, that doesn't really sound right to me because you've got these Ibnese right here that we just described that live inland. So I think that's some sort of misconception. Maybe it's the sailors think that. The sailors are more like, landlubbers. But I think maybe the mistake that Eandel is making here is to ascribe that belief to all Ibnese, where it may not be accurate at all. But if it is accurate, I would imagine it's just the sailors. But
it could also be that those interior Ibnese are cursed.
Hey, you're right.
I think like the underlying concept of all this is that people are complicated, and while some things may be common among a culture, they're not going to be the end all be all. Like we take the Dothraki, for example. They say the Dothraki have never sailed across an ocean. They'll never cross water. They believe the seawater is poison, and because horses can't drink from it. But then going back to the Bloody Mummers again, they have a Dothraki member, Solo the Fat.
A few of them, yeah.
Yeah, the one who cut Jaime's hand off. Well, if the Dothraki don't sail, then how is the Dothraki in Westeros? He had to cross an ocean to get there.
Littlefinger's teleporter, clearly. So earlier we mentioned the connection to the Skagosi. Here's a quote that shines some light on that idea.
A huge, hairy, foul-smelling folk, some maesters believe the Skagosi to have a strong admixture of Ibnese blood. Others suggest that they may be descended from giants, clad in skins and furs and untanned hides, and said to ride on unicorns. The Skagosi are the subject of many a dark rumor.
So it definitely makes sense that with all their seafaring, that the Ibnese would find Skagos pretty early on. It's not obscured. It's pretty much directly west and a little bit north. It's not like well hidden. Maybe it's hard to find an anchor, a harbor there, but the actual island, they would have found that pretty quickly. Nina suggests maybe the unicorns on Skagos came from Ib, or the other way around. They imported them and they started to proliferate. But the idea that they are connected, the Ibnese and the Skagosi, through bloodlines is pretty interesting, especially with this mention of giants, because we've already mentioned maybe the Ibnese are connected to giants physiologically. So there could be like a three-way connection point here, or a multi-pronged set of bloodlines here. What do you think, Tim? What does this Skagosi stuff mean to you?
There is so much I could say about Skagos. Skagos brings up a lot. Skagos is just like this really weird outlier in how many things proliferate there. I bring up in the notes I put how the Ibnese language is referred to as a grunting guttural language. And then that makes me think of the Old Tongue, which is spoken by giants and the free folk, how that's a clanging language.
Good point. So
I was thinking maybe if we're thinking language trees and common ancestors, maybe the Old Tongue could be derived from a form of Ibnese language, and both of them could go back even further to the hairy men that the Ibnese seem to come from, because the hairy men, we got to remember, the hairy men are different than sometimes these terms go hand in hand, and then other times they're used interchangeably. But then the hairy men and other times are referred to as a completely different race or species of people that are no longer around, and that the Ibnese are the modern day version of them. I guess
okay, that makes sense.
So, but the other thing about Skagos is the Skagosi, when it means stone-born, and then that makes me think of more of iron-born and how the iron-born claim to have come from the sea. And it always made me think the North is in this bad spot because the Skagosi rebel against the North a lot. There have been rebellions from the Skagosi. So you always got the North is constantly dealing with, they got iron-born on one side and Skagos on the other side. It's like two thorns in your side that you're constantly dealing with.
True. Yeah, that's a good way to frame it. And that is a good segue to talking about some Ibnese history. Due to their isolation, most of what we know about their history comes from interactions with other peoples. They haven't necessarily shared a lot of their own history with the Maesters. So we'll start with a quote from Ancient Times. Here is one quote. Sean, take us away.
The men of Ib have not always confined themselves to their islands. There is abundant evidence of Ibnese settlements on the Axe, on the Lorathi Isles, and along the shores of the Bitterweed Bay and the Bay of Tusks in the west, and Leviathan Sound and the Thousand Islands in the east. And history tells of several Ibnese attempts to seize control of the mouth of Sarn, attempts that brought the hairy men into bloody conflict with the Sarnori sister cities Sath and Saris.
So this really sparks the imagination. Full-blown war between Ib and the Sarnori. You think of Ibnese as more independent. You think of the whaling ships and things like that. But picturing an entire Ibnese army, what does that look like? How do they arm themselves for war? I can think of individual warriors, like Tim mentioned, the few members in the Brave Companions, the Bloody Mummers, and then Tyrion has a couple of Ibnese guardsmen that guard Shay. So we've seen them and how they're armed and things like that. But that is individual, mercenaries. This is an army, equipped with state gear or something like that. Levies, what that looks like. Something that this hasn't been seen in centuries, probably. Also, they would have naval battles. Recall the tale in the Kingdom of Sarnor episode of the place with tens of thousands of dead sailors and countless ships. The Lorathi call it Bloody Bay. The Ibnese call it Battle Bay. Same vibe, basically. They possibly raided up the White Knife in ancient times. The Wolf's Den was there, and lots of different. It suffered lots of different raids from lots of different places, and the Ibnese may have been among those. The mouth of the Sarn, as it says, they tried to seize that. That's extremely valuable. I mean, the Sarn is a huge river delta with all sorts of tributaries, and would control a lot of the trade from Sarnor. So you could see why that would be enormously valuable and why they would fight over it. So there's a lot of stuff here about what they would have been doing, and the idea of thinking of Sarnor versus Ib, it really sparks the imagination. What does this do for you, Tim? How do you picture this? Any ideas?
Yeah, it seems like the ibnese, their real strength lays in like naval warfare and try to stick to these coastlines, but the more that they try to go inland, the more they seem to fail. Like we said, like ibnese settlements don't seem to last very long, and they're always kind of pushed back, whether it's by the Sarnori or the Lorathi or Valyrians or what have you.
That does make a lot of sense. Yeah, I think, given their naval strength, that makes sense. Maybe a little bit like the Ironborn. Maybe not quite as bad as the Ironborn, but in terms of, if it's not close to the sea, they haven't been able to hold it. That does seem to be like a pattern.
Like, that was what I was going to say later. It's like it's not a matter of taking it; it's a matter of holding it, and that's where the obstacles seem to come in.
The ibnese might also be lowish population. They may not have a lot of pure manpower to hold their gains. That might be part of it as well, because they do like their space. They are independent minded. So once maybe they get together well for a conquest, the God King is able to bring them together for conquest, but then they start to fritter into their independent, kind of natural independent states, and that makes it hard for holding on to gains. Yeah, I could see that.
They did hold that territory in Essos. They ended up losing it to the Dothraki, but they had that for centuries.
Yeah, they did have it for quite a while. I mean, it sounds like it had ebbs and flows into how much territory it was. Sarnor pushed back, they would get it back, this and that, and then when the doom comes, that throws it all off. We're going to get to that in just a minute, because we don't have a whole lot on ancient times. It seems like that's the big pivot point for what we know about their history. Nina suggests maybe the Sarnori kingdom wasn't worth a whole land-based military operation, or maybe because of the ideas we just threw out, they just wouldn't be able to do it. She has similar ideas about their strength being in the Navy and anything you can't, maybe that could extend to river power, if the rivers are big enough. But other than that, going too far inland, it would be really difficult for them to keep a long term. Here's our next quote discussing the God Kings of Ib and how they were able to do that. And I think one thing to keep in mind as she's reading this quote is just to consider things might have been a lot different under the God Kings. It may be that now that we don't have the God Kings and some time has passed, this is when they've started to really flex their independence. But when they were ruled by a all-powerful monarch, they may have been forced to do, ruled by this great authority, and that may have changed some things. So keep that in mind.
The God Kings of Ib, before their fall, did succeed in conquering and colonizing a huge swath of northern Essos, immediately south of Ib itself, a densely wooded region that had formerly been the home of a small, shy forest folk. Some say that the ibnese extinguished this gentle race, whilst others believe they went into hiding in the deeper woods or fled to other lands.
Now, probably like humans, there's probably some who wanted to kill these things, these creatures, and just some that wanted to revere them. It may be an exaggeration, though. Maybe the revering was the more common attitude. We do have a take from Brian of Old Town, who was an explorer, who says that he interviewed Ibnese about this, and they told him that they've never seen one. None of the Ibnese he talked to had ever seen a forest walker in Ivikeveron, but they believe good fortune comes to those who leave, quote, offerings of leaf and stone and water overnight. So you'd leave like for Santa Claus, leaving cookies for Santa Claus, cookies and milk. So you leave this outside overnight, or
kind of like how I think it might even be an Icelandic thing. like Nordic type of thing. The idea to leave it for little elves.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I only say that, and I feel so silly for saying this, but it's a big thing in that movie, the Eurovision movie with Will Ferrell. They have actual little elves. Anyways, I think they're referencing a real thing that is done, real tradition in a silly way, but take that with a grain of salt.
That's neat.
Like the elves will. That's how
I can't believe it didn't more consciously click in my mind till Shea read this quote just now, that it's kind of like the Ib or dwarfs and the the small shy forest folk are elves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Tim already mentioned some of the Tolkien dwarf like comparisons, and there's probably
Yeah,
a
I'm
few
sure
more.
there's more. We got a little section coming up on that, but I just in this quote here, I was like, oh yeah,
Yeah, right. Isn't that neat? Yeah. So we don't really have much idea of their religion either. Like they have god kings. So that's got to be part of it because you're not a god king. That's definitely a religious element to it. They worship this ruler as a god, something like that. But other than that, that's pretty vague, right? It's just, okay, that's a religious thing, but we don't get any specifics. And Nina says if the god kings were directing the conquest and or extermination of the woodswalkers, and there are definitely overtones here of the wars in Westeros between the children of the forest and the first men, like the Andals, and the Andals rather. So yeah, there could be like the god kings may have seen this belief in the forest walkers as a threat to their power and sought to wipe them out, whereas the more rank and file everyday folk have this leave offerings thing, and that's their attitude. So yeah, no reason to think of them as a monolith. And this also really says a thing about the difficulty with breeding and the possible sterility. It also really maybe suggests why maybe the Ibnese have conquered outward, but why it's part of why they aren't able to make great gains, and part of why that no one's been able to conquer them is that a lot of conquest is through bloodlines. Like you marry in, like that's such a common thing. You don't actually extinguish the former rulers. You take a daughter or two and marry in, and then you've got that bloodline. The Ibnese, that can't work with the Ibnese, but either way, or at least it can't be relied on, I suppose. Right? Or I don't know. It seems like that would be a reason why their population would both not spread as much and also be hard to wipe out through those methods anyway.
It's also I think there's a lot of negative connotation to it, but a lot of times cultures assimilating each other is a way of making peace, if you will, and it's a little harder to do that when you literally marry and have kids and families with each other. So it is a limiting factor for sure.
Yeah, like they can still obviously get along and have drinks together and hang out and trade, but yeah, this is a small impediment for sure.
It makes you think like okay, like you secure an alliance through a marriage pact. Well, first you got to get over the physical attractiveness, I guess, of the Ibnese, and then
probably
second,
vice versa too.
yeah, or how that maybe they think you're the ugly one.
Yeah.
But then there's also like we think in our own main story, like how often do these marriages not work because they didn't lead to an heir. Unsuccessful births. Like House Aaron seemed to have like a lot of problems with birthing. So you already have that idea that having an heir or having children is already not a given. Then you put into this how unlikely it is, and even if it does happen, then there's the statistics of how likely are they to be sterile.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like the actual half Ibnese, half other race or ethnicity, however we want to term it, how many of them are actually going to be able to go on and have children of their own. It just seems to be so few and far in between.
Yeah, it's just such a risk. You're right. For a peace to be made through a marriage, it won't last if that family ceases to exist in a generation or two. So then you're back where you started.
You know, it's another thing too that we often see or think in terms of the royalty, right?
Yeah.
The noble families or whatever. But I think it still holds true, like down to common peasants. If there's if there's some sort of rivalry or racism or whatever it is between the Ibnese and the humans, or whatever race or branch of humans, just like in the real world, I think that once you have a couple like racism doesn't just magically evaporate, but it definitely gets smaller when you have in the real world. Like I have real life examples from my branches of my family. You go back a generation that were had these racist elements, but then the kids are gay or marry a black family or whatever else, and all of a sudden the grandparents have this new baby in their arms, and some of that racism gets a little diminished for this new
in some
child
cases
that they
unfortunately
want to
it gets
cherish,
worse, but you're right, but it's more likely
true,
to get better in a situation like that. You're right.
But if you can't get that situation with the Ibnese, then maybe it limits the ability to progress, assimilate, whatever word you want to use.
It's a method of bonding that maybe isn't open to them, which is that's a big impediment. So so that explains a lot about why they remain kind of a people apart, as it says at the beginning in that opening quote. The ibnese are different that way. So let's move forward to the fall of the God Kings, which came around the same time as the Doom. And when the Doom comes, it just this big upheaval, as Tim said. It affected the entire globe. We've discussed it in a number of different angles because it's pretty much every nation was affected, and there was differences in how they were impacted based on how close they were to Valyria, how tied they were to Valyria, lots of other factors. So let's have this next quote that starts us off on this subtopic.
At its greatest extent, the Ibnese foothold on Essos was as large as Ib itself, and far richer. More and more of the hairy men crossed over from the islands to make their fortunes there, cutting down the trees to put the land under the plow, damming the rivers and streams, mining the hills. Ruling over these domains was Ibish, a fishing village that swelled to become a thriving port and the second city of the Ibnese. With a deep harbor and high white walls, all that ended 200 years ago with the coming of the Dothraki.
Right. So the Dothraki, it says 200 years ago, so that's farther out than the Doom by a good bit. So obviously the Dothraki, when they emerged, the first thing they did was start beating down the Sarnori because they were the closest ones, and then they just kept going. The cities of the Quathai were in their path as well, and eventually the Ibnese. So you wonder whether, for a time, the Ibnese were picking on the Sarnori because they were getting weakened by the Dothraki. They're like, ooh, our traditional sometimes enemies are taking a hammering, so maybe we can take some of that from them. And then, of course, maybe that was a lack of foresight, as the buffer state of Sarnor was no longer there, and the Dothraki started focusing on their new foe in front of them, which was the Ibnese. The Ibnese being more stubborn, they weren't willing to pay the Dothraki off like a lot of other nations were, and that proceeded to turn to war, lots of fighting. And mixed emotions, to be sure. When the Sarnari were getting beaten up, they're probably like, all right, maybe that's good. But then when the Dothraki came for them, they're like, okay, this is bad. One, Kal Anko, they destroyed the Khalasar of Kal Anko. But this is a real damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Because if you're weak, the Dothraki will come for you. If you fight back, the Dothraki will come for you. So, because they're like, ooh, a good fight, and they're like, ooh, a weak person. They just, either way, they're going to want to fight you. So the Dothraki do what they do. They carried off the gods of Ibish to base Dothrak. Again, we have no idea what those gods are. I would love to have some idea. And they rebuilt. This is like the castle in the swamp from Monty Python. But the third one, no, that one was destroyed by the Dothraki as well. They rebuilt. It was destroyed a generation later. They rebuilt, and then, quote, here we go, Khal Dako shows up. Sean?
In the north, Khal Dako sacked and burned Ibish, reclaiming most of the small foothold the men of Ib had carved out in the northern coast of Essos. A much smaller Ibnese colony survives in the dense forests beside the Shivering Sea, huddled around the town they have named New Ibish.
Sounds like there should be a Three Little Pigs fairy tale about this. Three big Ibish.
Little Ib. Let me in. I've got lots of hair on my chin and on my upper lip and everywhere else too. Oh boy, this one writes itself.
Yeah, we gotta see a little children's book.
So Khal Dako actually burned an empty city. It's not necessarily clear from this that they just, the third time they're just like, no, we're just leaving. They just got in their ships and took off. And the Dothraki called them cowards for that. It's like, the same people that stood up to you several times, you call it like, yes, you just can't, this is no, damned if you do, damned if you don't here. And the Dothraki at first, it was protected from the Dothraki at first because the Dothraki don't like to go in deep forests. And apparently they have a reverence for these woods walkers also. So maybe the Dothraki didn't want to go into their territory to get to the Ibish because that would mean traipsing through the territory of the woods walkers. That's kind of speculation, but it's compelling speculation. Do you have a thought on the woods walkers element to this, Tim? Or is it a little too hard to pinpoint?
No, because I think we've seen how the Dothraki seem to be even though they don't sail in the same vein as sailors, they seem to have like this more superstitious beliefs, like the way how Miri Mazdor is called a witch over and over, and she kind of really was a witch. Just because it's mean doesn't mean it's wrong.
Yeah.
But really, with the ibnese, I can actually see the Dothraki being even more brutal with the ibnese, because it's like they're not we know what the Dothraki tend to do.
Yeah,
and these are an unattractive people, and they don't make good slaves. And if we think of Dothraki trying to lead Ibish down to Slaver's Bay. If the ibnese are as stubborn as they are, then I could see the ibnese being the ones that also put up a fight along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Like if there's ever a Spartacus situation along the way from the Dothraki Sea to Karth, it's probably an ibnese dude leading it.
Yeah, I could see like a Dothraki being like, yeah, just kill the ibnese. Let's not even bring him. He's just gonna cause trouble on the route or something.
yeah, which is an interesting perspective. It makes it's like this spread, like if all the people are kind of protecting each other by like, if I stand up now, it protects later of my brethren that will be, might make some Dothraki think twice later. So let's move. Sean, you got a point?
This is maybe stretching, maybe a Tim Foyley range, especially because I don't know how it can matter. But I wonder if, again, if we account for the fact that the ibnese aren't necessarily a monolith, and that over time people and cultures and conflicts can grow and change and whatever, I wonder if some of the woodswalkers that they conquered or destroyed or whatever, maybe they brought some back with them to Ib, and they live in the interior, and that's part of why they don't want anyone in there. Maybe they rescued some of those people and they're still surviving there, or
they were just there in the first place. Like Tim said, if it was a Pangea situation, Ib may have just been part of. Yeah, maybe that's an interesting idea. Yeah, can't dismiss that one out of hand. All right, let's talk about current times. What Ib looks like in these days, and by current I mean the last few hundred years. It's not necessarily right now, but with an emphasis on more current than a few hundred years ago. So a little range of operation here. Here's the quote from Shea.
Today, Ib and the Lesser Isles are governed by the Shadow Council, whose members are chosen by the Thousand, an assembly of wealthy guildsmen, ancient nobles, priests, and priestesses, not unlike the Magisters' councils of the free cities.
So they're following a relatively familiar path for real world society.
We're not talking about Lorath.
Which is that monarchy often is replaced by oligarchy. That's a fairly common thing in the real world. And so it makes sense here. The Shadow Council are most certainly the people that a lot of them, it says ancient nobles, priests, and priestesses, like the Magisters Guilds, but a lot of them are probably the people that are sitting at the top of these trade network empires, or whatever you want to call them. The guys profiting the most from these large global trade networks are very likely to be at the top of this.
I just can't help but think about how, if that's accurate when they call it the Thousand, it speaks to the population size of Ib a lot.
That's true. Yeah, I wonder I wonder what that means.
Like,
is it literally 1,000 people, or is that just a
code
name?
And is it the 1,000, but really like 40% of the population is part of the 1,000, or is it like 1% is? I don't know.
There's really only 3,000. So
yeah, it's the top third.
I mean, it's a big jump from like Karth's oligarchy, which is what, like the Council of 13.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It doesn't say how many people are on the Shadow Council. The 1,000 choose the Shadow Council, but we don't know how many people are on it. So maybe that's also like 10 or 12 or 13, but still.
Yeah.
It's like a sub. There's like a group. This is basically their version of democracy is 1,000 people. It's a very early. You could say that it's eventually it might be 10,000 people voting, which would be closer to democracy. We discussed this in the Greek when we brought up Greece, and how a lot of times 30,000 people were voters, but then 10,000 people were voters. It was basically like who had more power, the oligarchs, the Democrats, and the number would be pushed out. Like certain groups would be included or not included based on who was in power at the time. might be similar in Ib. Who is part of the 1,000, meaning like who's allowed into that. There may be restrictions, and some people would want to keep others out to keep more power for themselves. But that general quote continues to describe what is going on outside of the islands. So let's continue.
Ib retains a modest foothold on Essos even to this day, on a small peninsula surrounded by the sea and defended by a wooden wall almost as long as the ice wall of the Night's Watch, if not a third as high, a towering earth and timber palisade bristling with defensive towers and protected by a deep ditch. Behind the earthworks, the men of Ib have built the town of New Ibish to rule over their much diminished domains, but sailors say that the new town is a sad and squalid place, more akin to Ibsar than to the thriving city that the horse lords reduced to ruins. I stumbled for a second there because I read that. I thought I said Ibsad. Like
Ibsad.
More akin to Ibsad.
Maybe I'll have to rename it Ibsad if it doesn't. If things get worse there. That's a pretty casual mention for a wall that huge, isn't it?
I know. I was like, yeah, that's still very large.
Yeah, that's a huge wall, and it's protecting a sad and squalid place. That's really a big disparity there for such a huge wall for such a tiny little.
I mean, that's tall, but the ice wall is a very long wall.
Yeah,
so to be that long, it also speaks.
And this is earth and timber. It's not. I mean, yeah, almost. Arguably, that might be harder. I don't know. I don't know much about building huge walls, but more, like trees need to be cut down. Yeah, I don't know how to do that.
Assuming that there was some magic involved in the ice wall in the north, then it probably was harder if they actually had to physically go do it without the help of magic.
That's true. But the other implication here is that New Ibish could return to a state. Like, it got that big before. It just had a humongous setback, being burned several times in the last few hundred years. It could maybe get big again. What do you think, Tim? You think there's a chance it recovers? Let me throw a scenario at you before you answer. Let's say Daenerys brings a huge number of Dothraki with her to Westeros. An amount, like if she brings like 100,000 Dothraki, that's how big Drogo's Khalasar was. Maybe that's not enough, and maybe she brings like even more than that.
Big power vacuum.
Exactly. So many Dothraki fighting men leave the region that it might open up the ibnese a chance to re-expand again. That's maybe something that could be just 2 sentences in the aftermath of everything near the end of the last book, where there's just like different things are being described. It's happening around the world. It's something that I kind of, when I was thinking about this, kind of latched onto this as an idea. What do you think about this, Tim? Is that too many? Is that a little too far-fetched? Or just in general, what are your thoughts on all this New Ibish and this stuff?
Well, it makes me think, like, I think a good indicator of that would be of how that would go. We might see when Danny returns from the call, because Barristan is leading the people he's leading. There's Lazarine, there's the red sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this is going to have to do with how well are the Dothraki going to play with others, because right there you already have people who are historically been decimated by the Dothraki. The Lazarine are constantly hit by the Dothraki, but now you have Lazarine members that are being trained by Sir Barristan, that are now how are they going to respond to fighting alongside Dothraki?
Mm-hmm.
It's again like these Tolkien things, like a dwarf fighting with an elf. I never thought I'd see that. And the same situation could be with Ib. It's like if Dothraki show up at New Ibish, and it's an idea of, well, how much is our history, the bad blood between us and our history, going to factor into this new alliance? Alliances can make or break depending on histories between the two groups. Like I brought up talking about how often the British fought the French only to become allies, but that's also not the case. Some enemies just stay enemies. It's really
yeah.
It's a good question. Like I can't really. I think it can go either way. I think a lot of that actually is more on how the Dothraki respond, though.
That's a good point.
How well
yeah.
we're going to do it.
It's not like the one thing is interesting too. It's not like the Dothraki have like a bunch of cities that would need to be overrun, right? Normally that's a thing when you're trying to take territory away from another people. They have settlements that you have to deal with, but the Dothraki, they don't have that. They just have these roaming armies that might just not be there anymore if they go with Dany and like, hey, it's just wide open grassland now. They could build some towns and maybe hold them. Although that's traditionally been very difficult against the Dothraki, but maybe we're entering a new era of maybe the Dothraki will be, I don't know, just different. The outlook is different. Maybe a lot of them will stay in Westeros. Like, will they go, if Dany brings a lot of Dothraki over to Westeros to fight the others and White Walkers and all that, whether or not she lives through all this, certainly they're not all going to die, I wouldn't think. So are they going to stay? Are they going to want to go back to the Dothraki Sea? Like, interesting open question. Not necessarily a question for today, but something to think about when it's all over, said and done with. Are people just going to go home? For people like the Dothraki, that's an interesting question. For the Stormlanders, that's like, yeah, well, their home is just right there. That's not a big deal. But for the people who came across the sea, yeah, what's going to happen? Speaking of being wiped out and rising again, time to circle back to the doom that came to Sarnath. The Ibnese in that story were wiped out and then rose up again out of the sea, like literally out of the sea or the lake, to wipe out the Sarnori or the people of Sarnath. And Tim, was there anything more you wanted to add to that in terms of how it references this, or if you want to say more about Tolkien? This is our last shot at discussing influences. So say what you want to say. I'd love to hear it.
Okay, so one thing I want to bring up, when we're talking the Sarnori and the Dothraki, there are examples of how certain Sarnori kings actually worked with the Dothraki against other Sarnori.
True.
Sometimes they use them as mercenaries to settle old grudges, and it's this idea of, okay, well, they're not going to do this. They did that to other Sarnori, to my rival, but they're not going to do the same to me, only for that to then bite them in the ass later on.
Repeatedly, yeah.
And what's interesting here is what remains of the Sarnori, what remains of the Tall Men, despite historically being at odds with George's ibnese, they are now protected. Like the 20,000 or so Tall Men that still exist in the remnants of Sarnor are protected by through support from Ib and Lorath.
That's true.
So it's kind of like this idea of the people that were once your enemies are now the one thing that's now propping you up.
Yeah, they're your lifeline. Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's true. Things really do change, don't they? That's a great point. Did you have anything more on dwarves and Tolkien comparisons here, or did we go through that sufficiently?
I think we covered a lot of that.
Okay, cool. I had a few notes on Neanderthals just to maybe make a few comparisons. They're a bit similar physically in some ways. They were evolved for cold weather. That's a similarity. Thicker neck bones, shorter but thicker, bigger, stronger jaws. That's also a similarity. That said, Ibnese are probably more distant from humans than Neanderthals are from humans. Ibnese have smaller eyes. Neanderthals had larger eyes than humans because of you need to collect more light when you live in certain places. Ibnese are pale and hairy. Neanderthals were probably not pale. They were probably darker skinned, but they were hairy. So the range of Neanderthals was Europe and the Mediterranean, not Iceland. Sparser groups than humans. They lived in smaller communities. Supposedly went extinct about 40,000 years ago. It's debated why, but it's surely not just one factor. It had to be a lot of things. And so, yeah, so like Tim said at the beginning, this is George's version of if they didn't go extinct, but were able to carve out their own niche in the greater world and hold on to that and partly thrive. Like they're not on the brink here. They're not big. They're not but they are all over the place, and they're nowhere near going extinct. So they're a minority, but they're not under any threat. And we don't really hear of like genocide against the Ibnese. Like the closest thing I can hear about that is the winter fever was brought to Westeros, and some Ibnese got blamed for it, and all the Ibnese in the town were blamed and killed for it. But that's wrong. It's evil, but it's not the same as just trying to wipe out all Ibnese everywhere, right? That's like a more localized paranoia and panic. So, and we have no examples of anyone trying to conquer Ib itself, unless those dragons were maybe an example of that. But if that was a thing. It was in the far gone past. Do you think there's ever been attempts to conquer the island of Ib? Does that sound kind of... It's difficult to like conquering the Iron Islands, right?
Who wants it?
Yeah, who wants it?
I don't know. I feel like it might be one of those situations where like there's a lot of other really good, tasty, valuable places to go after. Like that's like the bottom 5 places you'd want to go. That's just my perspective on it.
Yeah.
Like, maybe there is some great value because like if you come kill the whales and get whale blubber, you know, like,
and there's gold there apparently. Yeah.
Like there's some stuff there, but I still could see it being like, why?
But it is full of ibnese. You know, they're not going
far
away.
away.
Yeah, it is far away. It's cold.
That's the one thing. Yeah,
cold.
Yeah, it's in a cold area.
They're like hardy,
timber.
gouty warriors, as they say. Like they're not easy to take out.
Yeah, wouldn't be easy.
Like if you think of like the disputed lands, that's supposed to be more of a barren wasteland at this point, yet it's constantly fought over.
It's true.
So it seems like what's interesting, it seems like it with the gold and the mines and everything it has to offer should be a lot more valuable.
But there's just all these other reasons why.
I think it just has to be it's just out of the way.
Because we have examples of people fighting over so much less. The disputed lands, the three sisters have been back and forth between the Vale and the North, yet it's like they really don't have much to offer.
Yeah.
So why keep them?
And an invasion fleet would have to deal with their navy if they knew it was coming, and that would be a whole thing.
I mean, it's just that I think it's just like you don't have to cross Ib to get to anywhere important.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, it's not like a
trade route
really
for anyone but the ibnese.
And if that's not true, that would be why the ibnese keep that a secret. Like if they don't want people to think, oh wow, if they knew all their secrets, people would be more interested in conquering them.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about trade and seafaring. It's our last full section before our little outro. It starts off with another quote. Sean, take us away.
Bold fishermen, they travel the northern seas widely in search of cod, herring, whitefish, and eel, but it is as whalers that they are best known in the wider world. Their great-bellied whaling ships are common sights in ports up and down the narrow sea and beyond. Though seldom pleasing to the eye or nose, ibnese ships are renowned for their strength, for they are built to weather any storm and withstand the assaults of even the largest leviathans.
This separates them from most of the comparisons we've made. This seafaring thing is a huge aspect of their culture that makes them really different than like dwarves or Neanderthals. Neanderthals did seafare in the Mediterranean, but like they weren't ocean going. They weren't like this. They weren't all a global trade network and sailing places that other people don't even know exist. Dwarfs, as far as I know, in Tolkien didn't sail like at all. And so these are world-class sailors. That really separates them from all these other comparisons. Certainly even the ibnese of Lovecraft weren't sailors. They were a lake. Well, they were very much non-human, so that's a completely different thing. They could swim. They could just go underwater on their own. What do they need sailing ships for? So, as I said before, the Shadow Council, probably the biggest beneficiaries of this giant trade network, or at least the most powerful members of the 1,000 that vote them in. They surely are trading with nearby places like Braavos, Lorath, and Omber. In fact, the first place that Braavos traded with was the ibnese. Probably because they thought, well, the ibnese know how to keep a secret. Because the first Braavos didn't want anyone to know where they were, because they didn't want Valyria to find out where they were. Because, of course, they were escaped slaves from Valyria. And some of those original escaped slaves were ibnese. It may have been the ibnese element among the slaves that suggested, hey, why not trade with our people? They're not going to tell. That's a good way to get started, to build up a little, trade, gain some wealth, make the city more stronger, and make it more able to announce to the world that it exists and work with that. So, and you wonder too, Nina asks the question, maybe the Braavosi learned a lot about sailing from the ibnese, borrowed it and followed in their footsteps or in their wake, as it were. So that makes a lot of sense because the Braavosi are relatively new as a culture.
I just want to bring this.
I see what you did there.
In their way. I just want to bring up a little thing that went on in the chat where they were talking about Neanderthals and the idea that Neanderthals were lactose intolerant. Because we hadn't domesticated cows yet. So, of course, they were lactose intolerant. But just the idea of... I wonder if the ibnese have different dietary restrictions as well.
Oh, yeah,
and
they might.
Not with lactose necessarily, but they might process blubber better. I don't know.
Yeah, certainly a lot of cultures are lactose intolerant more so than us white folk, us Westerners. Like,
So I wonder if they would be able to have milk, dairy products or
makes
not.
sense. Like the diet DNA does include some of that stuff. Yeah.
I think the ibnese strike me as a people who would definitely be drinking that fermented yak milk.
They do. That's funny.
What is their alcohol choice? Yeah, I wonder. What do they drink? What libation?
Something I want to add with like ibnese Bravosi relations. Now, we've talked about ibnese being used as slaves, like slave ending up in the Fighting Pits Marine, but we've never heard of the ibnese being slavers themselves.
True.
Now, if Ib is a culture that was never a slaver nation, never, or maybe even anti-slavery, then it would make sense that they would have a good relation with Bravos to start. That relations would be very amenable.
One, there is maybe slight evidence of slavery there, not there, but one Ibnese sailor, a harpooner, tries to buy Podrick from Brienne. So I don't know that's slavery, but like that indicates the entire nation as slavery. Well, I don't think it does, but it's something. It's worth a mention.
Yeah, what's he want to buy?
Was he trying to buy him?
Yeah, what did he want Pod for?
That's what I was going to say. Is like, was he buying him for keeps or buying him for a night?
Yeah. Good point.
The Ibnese frequent whorehouses.
I don't think that was clear. You're right.
If Satin's an indication, we know, and people have their preferences.
Brienne wasn't about to ask for specifically, what exactly do you want him for? No, she's like, no, just, we need no further explanation. That's a big nope. Yeah. So, like, when we talk about how they probably have sailing and trading network with places like Nefer and Mossavi and maybe other places, again, they not only have different maps and routes, but they probably have different methods of communication and different relationships. Certain peoples might prefer to deal with the Ibnese, like the Bravosi, like we just said, because they may have similar values about certain important cultural touchstones like slavery. Or they might keep secrets well. You can trust the Ibnese. Or maybe they're just their stubbornness. We talk about how that might work in people's favor. They're less likely to renege on a deal or less likely to sell you crappy goods. Not like it's impossible. I can't imagine that like every single Ibnese sailor is on the up and up. Surely not. I mean, some of them are in the Brave Companions. So it's clearly, like any culture, there's some scumbags and some good people. But it might be like the average Ibnese is a little bit more upfront with dealing just because of cultural reasons. Who knows? It's possible like that. As well, they might have like their own legends about ice dragons and other legends of places like Cannibal Bay. Cannibal Bay is that place that supposedly you sail in and you can't get out. It's like this refers, in fact, this is connected to the legends of ice dragons. So you're stuck until you starve to death. It's kind of like something out of ancient real world exploring of like the Arctic Circle, like the Terror, when you get your ship just like gets stuck in ice or what have you. All right, our last little section is characters and outlook. Some of these characters have been mentioned before. We've wondered at the places on the map the Ibnese know of that they keep secret, and we wonder the same of the Summer Islands, right? The Summer Islanders have places that they probably haven't told about. Look at them together. What did the Summer Islanders and the Ibnese, what's their connection to each other? The two premier sailing peoples of the world, but really far apart in terms of geography. One's a warm weather people, one's a cold weather people. They look a lot different. Pale-skinned, hairy versus dark-skinned, not particularly hairy. Lots of like little physiological differences like that. But they would both have a lot to say about sailing. I wonder if there's a lot of trading. They might swap nautical information. They might have secrets they would trade with each other because only they would be the only equivalent trading partner. Only the Summer Islanders would have maps of obscure value, as to the extent that the Ibnese do. The only place we actually see Summer Islanders and Ibnese together is the Bloody Mummers, though. The Bloody Mummers are this really unusual melting pot of different races and cultures of all the worst people. Nymeria kills an Ibnese man that's hunting Arya. The Brother Without Banners kill a couple at least. And as Tim mentioned before, Tog Joth, who is possibly with Zalo the Fat, who cut Jaime's hand off, and Urzwick, who is the highest ranking living member of the Brave Companions. who's out there. So they were last seen trying to make it to Old Town, presumably to get to a port and flee Westeros. And we'll see if that happens. I imagine George is not going to forget about them. As I said before, lots of different sailors here and there. Kat, Theon, Dany, Quentin, Martell, they all see Ibnese here and there. Arya gets yelled at by an Ibnese sailor and propositioned by another, and sells clams and stuff to others. She meets Asadora of Ibn, who is a sex worker at the Happy Port. So I think she's the only female Ibnese that we meet on screen. Others are mentioned, like Brown Ben Plum's grandmother. But
it's interesting to hear the names, because we got Tog Joth and we got Asadora. They're just
very
different sounding names.
They are a little different sounding, aren't they? Asadora doesn't sound like Tog Joth at all.
It just doesn't sound like at all. But they don't necessarily have to always have an Ibnese name.
Yeah.
And there could just be a huge difference in female Ibnese names and male names, too. I wish we had a greater sample size to really be able to tell, but we just don't.
It's like the Saranori. We have 3 names, all of which sound like Azor Ahai, so we can tell a lot just from that, but it's not exactly a large sample.
Yeah, it could be just the small sample size. One name is an outlier, but also that outlier might be connected to something that creates a lot of outliers. Like if it's a sailing culture, they might be exposed to a lot of different names and places, or name their kids after people from other areas that they've encountered or sailed with, and so on.
They might have gone somewhere. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think that it probably would have more outliers.
Tyrion has 2 guards who are Ibnese that for Shay. He needed guards that wouldn't be recognizable as his guards. Like his clansmen are clearly his men, so he didn't want to have that. He couldn't have like Bronn be there. So he needed people that could do that. Bronn and Varys found them for him, which is like, okay, well, Varys found you these guys? Well, who are they really working for? And the 2 guards are really into each other. They're gay lovers apparently. And it's probably, maybe this is going too far in speculation, but maybe they left Ib because their relationship wasn't accepted there. I don't know. It's not something that's well defined in Westeros in general, which probably means it's not a big deal, but who knows? My last small point before we get to our little outro bit here is that one of the ships Jon orders Cotter Pike to commandeer is an Ibnese whaler, possibly the most sturdy ship in that ragtag fleet now. Although with dead things in the water, that might not save them. But I'm curious to know, of all the ships in that group, that one might be the one that's got the best chance to make it out alive. And if not, well, then maybe we'll have some Ibnese whites in the mix, which is, well, even whites deserve a bit of diversity. So, Tim, I have a question for you. When you're dealing with theories that are maybe off the beaten path, do you call them Timfoil?
No.
I saved that for last.
Now he does.
What I do with tinfoil is I do grade them, and one of my running jokes is that when you got a tinfoil theory, there's that Reynolds wrap quality, and then there's that dollar store junk.
Even tinfoil.
And I'm like, you got to bring I want that Reynolds wrap quality tinfoil.
I like it.
That's what I try to bring with some of my theories.
Excellent. Yeah, where do people find you? Yeah, like give us your final statements and tell people where to find you, where you're going to be at, what you're working on.
Okay, so you can find me on Twitter at The Grey Waste. You can find me on YouTube, Grey Waste Tim. That's my channel. My last stream that I did last Saturday was a stream quest of Unknown Kadal.
Stream quest, nice.
We went over the Lovecraft story and kind of pulled some elements from that story, related it back to Song of Ice and Fire.
Cool.
The next one I have planned for my own channel, I want to do a reading of Shadow over Innsmouth.
Nice.
And do a lot more of like these fish people areas that get brought up, Thousand Isles, and I have a lot to say about the Three Sisters.
Cool.
I have some opinions about them.
Heck yeah. A lot of people cite A Shadow over Innsmouth as their favorite Lovecraft story. It's definitely in my top 5, but I always have trouble picking a favorite. It might be Color Out of Space, but I'm not sure. Anyway, do you have a favorite?
My favorite Lovecraft story, probably the classic Call of Cthulhu. The thing,
good, yeah.
That's what he's most famous for. That's what started all, and that's the thing that's really still. That's tends to be like when you think Lovecraft, like that's the immediate go-to.
Yeah, I hear you
What's
there.
the one with the? I think it was a submarine captain.
Oh, that's
You remember that story?
the temple, or the. Is it the temple? No. There's a big undersea temple that they stumble on. Yeah, that they encounter. And that's a big.
They don't go into it or anything. No.
Oh,
It's not the one I'm thinking.
He
of
tries
anyway.
to at the end. He decides to die that way because he knows he's going to die. He's like he gets out of the sub and tries to like go in. So yeah, it's pretty creepy. But he's the hardcore like German sub commander that's like super disciplined and rigid, and it's really good. Like, how does a person like that respond to horror? That's kind of
Yeah.
But one thing
It is the temple. Okay, cool. Yeah.
And one thing I want to say, like when you were relating back to the idea of Ibnese relations with Summer Islanders, I could actually picture like I just want to set a scene for you. Okay, so like we're at a port bar. And there's some Bravosi. I mean, not Bravo. Like I guess Bravos would be a good setting for this. A Bravosi bar with some Summer Islanders drinking with some Ibnese, just talking and laughing with each other.
Swapping
like
sailing stories.
Stupid Westerosi. I know what's down south, but I'm never gonna tell them. Yeah, that's good. That's good. I know what's up north, and I'm never gonna tell them. And then they're just trying to be like, tell me what you know.
Trying to get each other drunk, trying to get just a little bit of clue what's going on.
Just a little bit of information.
So that's awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming, Tim. We've got 2 very short outro quotes here that both refer to Ib that I think are too fun to not include. Both of these quotes are maybe in the top 10% of A Song of Ice and Fire quotes because we've referred to them before. Other people have referred to them, but they're kind of semi-famous, and they both, again, refer to Ib. So the first one is from Varys. Spare a thought for these poor dudes. In A Storm of Swords, Varys brings us this message to Tywin and the rest of the council.
A kraken has been seen off the fingers. He giggled. Not a Greyjoy, mind you. A true kraken. It attacked an Ibnese whaler and pulled it under.
Now, this next quote is a Greyjoy, mind you. The Iron Captain, a feast for crows. Y'all know this one.
You serve one goddamn fair. But I have served 10,000. From Ib to Ashai, when men see my sails, they pray.
Yeah. Also spare a thought for the unfortunate Ibnese who have fallen into Euron's clutches, because that wouldn't be pretty. No, it would not. Okay. The answer to our trivia question, the largest known creature, according to the World of Ice and Fire, it's been cited in this episode a few times, the Leviathan. Yes, indeed, the Leviathan. Its name inspires and speaks to great size, and the Ibnese specifically go hunt them in their breeding grounds. So again, these people are brave. They go after the largest things in the world, and I guess haul them home. You don't bring that up on your ship. I guess you haul it home. You tow it back to the port. Probably the same with the whales.
The Leviathan is like a whale, or what?
It is. I think it's classed as a whale in Westeros.
Okay, yeah.
Or in Song of Ice and Fire, yeah.
Clarify that for everyone, because the Leviathan can be a lot of creatures could be classed in the real world as like a Leviathan version of something.
It can be a description rather than a specific like
thing,
species or what have you. Yeah, definitely.
And Sean, we'll also want to make sure you get a cat for us today.
Yeah.
And
I shall get a cat.
I think I'm gonna have Aziz show off Xerxes.
Oh, cool! I can show off Xerxes. Excellent.
Should I go grab
Tim,
James?
You should.
I was going to say, Tim, you have a cat too, right? Yeah.
I'm surprised he hasn't popped up during this. Usually,
Cat break, cat fest.
Cat fest. Xerxes
Emperor
is
Xerxes is
right
here with his
There he
blue
is.
eyes.
Yeah, our beloved boy. He's a little cut off with his head. You can't see his pretty blue eyes.
I mentioned a few of our other episodes for y'all to explore for further deep dives. When Giants Roamed, to discuss more about the Ibnese and their connection to giants and the hairy men and the Skagosi and all that. Our recent World of Ice and Fire episodes on Lorath and the Kingdom of Sarnor, of course, are quite relevant as well.
Ha ha ha.
Look at Tim's kitty with his pink collar there.
Oh, we couldn't quite get all 3 on screen at the same time, but we got 2 on screen at the same time, which is pretty good.
Xerxes has moved on to do more
Yeah.
cat things elsewhere. So no episode next week, my fellow Westorians. We are at San Diego Comic-Con. Hopefully we will bring you some excellent news, some reports, some fun stuff. So we'll look out for maybe a bonus stream on that. We'll see.
Yeah.
And definitely, though, the week after is Dragonstone. It won via the Sarnor rule, which, of course, for us means that it got second in our polling 3 different times, which gets it a grandfathered in, so to speak, grandmothered in. Hey, there's a kitty from Sean.
There's the third cat.
That's right. That's a nice, docile, sweet-looking girl there.
Oh, there she is. Oh yeah. We do have 2 cats on screen.
Look at
still.
this.
Yeah, kitties. Xerxes is watching them. He's right here looking at your cats. He's watching the screen. He's particularly looking at your cat right now, Sean. He's staring right at her.
Ooh, look at that.
Oh, she's so pretty. Oh.
You can.
David's still here. He's just out of frame.
Yeah, I can see the ear. I can barely on your black
The
shirt.
black cat on your black shirt, yeah.
I can barely see.
So you can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/History of Westeros. You can sign up through Spotify. If you've already got a Spotify subscription, you can just add on an extra $5 a month and get all our bonus content. You can go to our website, historyofwesteros.com, make a one-time donation, and we'll just email you the links to both the bonus videos and podcast episodes. And we appreciate any form of support, even if it's just word of mouth. Word of mouth is great. That helps us a lot. So however you want to support the show, we will appreciate it.
Also, what's your cat's name, Tim? I didn't quite catch it.
Damon.
Nice.
Oh,
Excellent.
glad I asked.
Damon the kitty.
Nice.
All right. Yeah, thanks again, Tim. Remember, folks, as we've been saying the last few weeks, if you're going to be in DragonCon or around Atlanta for Labor Day weekend, make sure to hit us up. We're doing a screening of House of the Dragon, Episode 3, in a rented theater. Be about a few hundred people there, so it should be a nice party.
Yeah, with the costume contest. So if you're coming, start thinking about some cosplay.
Yeah, and you can drink some of Sean's crazy beverages there, too.
Yeah, you can. I realize. Yeah, totally.
Mm.
And make sure you go to our Threadless store, historywesteros.threadless.com, to check out the new logo designs and get yourself a shirt or bag or some stickers or something.
Yeah. And then go head over to Tim's channel, check out his work, and check out Nina at goodqueenalley.tumblr.com with 1 L. Thanks to all of our patrons who have been supporting us for both the long term and the short term, whichever category you fall into. We appreciate that. We wouldn't be able to do it without you. Thanks to Joey, Jesse, Kevin, and Michael for the maps, the intro, the song, and all that good stuff that makes our show look cooler and feel even nicer. Thanks to our mods on Facebook and Discord for helping keep things smooth and clean and all that. We appreciate the effort. And if you're feeling up for a stream on another topic, head over to Here Be Dragons. They're discussing the classic film The Fifth Element.
Which has a great first line.
The first line in The Fifth Element
For
is...
another trivia. Can anyone tell me? I can say, so can...
Sean knows it. What is it?
Know
Aziz, light.
Yes.
Yeah.
My name is the first word in that movie. That's right. And I saw that movie in the
I think
theaters.
they might even say it several times. Aziz,
Light.
Aziz,
Yeah.
light.
I know. I saw the movie in the theater. My friends and I were like, "What? Because no one ever said my name until Aziz Ansari came along, or Tariq Aziz, the Saddam Hussein's left hand man. Like, I'd rather forget about that one. Anyway, we'll see you all next time. Thanks again. Oh, Sean, you had another thing to say?
I just wanted to make another plug for Better Call Saul,
yeah.
the show on TV.
Yes.
And it's only got a few episodes left, and I've got a video on YouTube about how they're using color, which is amazing.
I watched it. It was really good.
And
Yeah, check it out, folks.
I appreciate any feedback that anyone wants to give me about the show. If you haven't started watching it, do start watching it. I'd love to know. Anyway.
Cool.
I was watching it earlier today while I was working on the notes.
Oh, awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Better Call Saul. And for one last plug for me, I just want to shout out to Gray Area and the ladies of Direwolf City. Those are I bought for them. That's coming back.
Oh,
and,
cool. Yeah, they are coming back. Yeah, that's great.
And I'm scheduled for my second appearance on Obsidian Nights podcast with Gray Area.
Heck yeah.
I got John 6 with the Clash of Kings, which is the Bale the Bard chapter.
Nice. Heck yeah.
Very
That's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah, we'll be having 2 of the ladies from Direwolf City on one of our Saturday streams for House of the Dragons coverage as some of our guests. We'll be having a whole bunch of different guests each week on Saturday, as I think Aziz has mentioned.
Look at how well this community works together. Yeah. So, okay, folks, until next time, on behalf of everyone here at History of Westeros, you know what to do. Valar, Rereadis.